Hi, welcome back, everyone. This is your friend Greedy Fanfics, bringing you another fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the first part of What If Deku Had an Embrace Quirk, written by Corolla Murdoch. All credit for this story goes to Corolla Murdoch, so please support them by checking out the link in the description for more details. Don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this. Now, let's get into the fanfic. Midoriya Izuku believed that he had learned his place in life at an early age. The realization was cemented as the early years of his childhood passed. Gradually, as the veil of ignorance was lifted, his new awareness was revealed and he learned to perceive many things as different, as having an existence of their own outside of himself. Meanwhile, new experiences and knowledge were crystallizing in his heart. His mother loved him, his father had a fire quirk, Kaken didn't like being carried, Aunt Mitsuki liked combing his mother's hair, Uncle Masaru liked cooking to music, and they could all count on Izuku. Because he is not very special. He's not the best friend for Kaken, and he doesn't always know how to deal with his explosive nature. And maybe he doesn't live up to his father's expectations, and his anguish makes his mother cry. But if he has anything to offer, it's his heart. And it will be the calm that his friend needs, the patience that his father requires, and the peace that can heal his mother's anxiety. For when Midoriya Izuku thinks about his role in life, one memory comes to his mind. He was 4 years old. And he remembers hearing his mother's soft sobs, muffled under the sleeves of her worn jumper. From his place behind the door, he had a glimpse of her tired expression, her hunched shoulders and the mobile phone on the carpet in her room. It was a grim picture for such a young boy to take in. But it was not so difficult to decipher the reason for her distress. How long had it been since he had heard the baritone bass voice of his father? Where was he when Inko wiped away his tears after his diagnosis? Perhaps his mother's displeasure was due to another business trip that prevented his father from returning before his 5th birthday. Or maybe she would have to work double shifts that weekend too, leaving Izuku in the care of their neighbor. Mrs. Yoshida is nice. Even though her cats leave my uniform full of hair. Ignorant of reason, but with his eyes suddenly filled with the beginning of stinging tears, Izuku had walked back down the corridor. He had taken a deep breath and blinked hard to wipe away the evidence of his own discontent. Finally, he had approached his mother's room again, stamping his feet and waving his all-might figure in the air as he knocked on the door. Awkwardly ignoring how his mother wiped her eyes with her hands and quickly combed her hair with her fingers, Izuku shouted, "Mummy, Mummy, we beat the chameleon." "Oh, that's my baby." She cooed, and Izuku looked at his own reflection in his mother's big green eyes, his round, freckled face, his red nose and his viridian curls, and wondered if that was how she saw him. Like a little copy of her, a permanent companion. Izuku lifted his arms. Even though he was no longer a little boy, she held him to her chest and kissed him on the nose. She placed him on her hip, and with a wave of her fingers, his mobile phone floated into her palm. "You are amazing. I wonder what the weight limit is that you can levitate. Have you ever lifted someone up before? It would have to be a very light person, wouldn't it? Like a baby, or someone with a quirk that makes them very light or very small. Could you lift me up when I was a baby? Like that hero we saw on TV the other day. Easy, love." His mother put the mobile phone in her pocket and wrapped both hands around his nervous form. "And what are you talking about? You're still my baby." She bounced him gently on her hip, and Izuku giggled as All Might slipped out of his hands and landed with outstretched limbs on the bed. "But I'm almost 5. The latest mark on the door says I've grown 3 centimeters in the past few months." And Inko finally smiled at him, her expression clear and bright, her arched lips moving against his curls as she replied over his head, "Izuku, no matter how much time passes or how much you grow, you'll always be my baby." Heart pounding against his chest, Izuku squirmed in her arms, wrapping his little hands around her neck and resting his chin on her soft shoulder. Closing her eyes, Inko pulled him closer to her chest and allowed herself to bask in Izuku's warmth as she melted into his embrace. Hero analysis for the future number 13 was floating in a pond surrounded by koi fish. The pages were crumpled and soaked. When Izuku pulled it away from the greedy mouths, it dripped onto his red shoes, and a shiver that had little to do with the cold ran through his aching body. "Stupid fish, this is not food." he muttered to himself. A weary sigh escaped his lips. Mentally, he scolded himself for provoking Kaken's wrath. But it had not been he who had brought up the subject of his application to the UA. Shaking his notebook so that it wouldn't leak so much on the way home, he wondered for a moment how it was that his relationship with Kaken had fallen so terribly apart. Although he could not pinpoint the exact moment when their paths began to diverge, he knew that it had been that way since they were both very young. With the advent of his friend's powerful quirk, which complemented his wild personality so well, and his own lack of obvious quirks. Although Izuku still treated Kaken with kindness and appreciation, and still carried the familiarity of his nickname, Kaken was not very receptive to his worthless attention. He could still feel his burning fingers on his shoulder. His words, carved with a chisel into the stone of his chest, were repeated incessantly in his mind. If you want a quirk so badly, why don't you pray for one in your next life and take a swan dive off the roof? A shiver ran through his cold hands and he swallowed a sob as the echo of his sharp voice curled over her broken heart. Stupid Kaken, he whispered. I know you don't mean it. With a final shake of his notebook, he adjusted the straps of his backpack and made his way home. Despite his earlier anguish, Izuku still held out hope for a good afternoon. His mother had told him that morning that she would prepare katsudon for dinner. He had added some information to his hero analysis, and All Might had been spotted in the center of Mizutofu, solving crimes. After walking for a few minutes, he paused to take in the silence of the street around him. His hands hovered on his elbows, like a weak protective cage, and he thought to himself. No matter what anyone else says, I have to believe in myself. And he nodded, reaffirming his positive attitude. With renewed vigor, he crossed under the dark bridge, gripping the straps of his backpack tightly and thinking that, despite everything, he could still enjoy a good afternoon. Then he fell victim to a villain. All Might was bigger in real life. He seemed to be all-encompassing, his silhouette against the dark alley seemed to stretch forever. His voice was deeper, his figure was firmer, and his scowl was more serious than it had been portrayed on television. Though Izuku couldn't say that he'd ever seen him frown like that in TV. He usually reserved that expression for the most terrifying villains. Or under rather unfavorable circumstances. After all, he was the symbol of peace. Always saving people with a smile. Izuku received his notebook in a haze, barely able to register the hastily scribbled signature on the still crisp pages of his brutalized notebook. He watched as his hero trapped the villain who had nearly suffocated him in small soda bottles, barely coherent mutterings escaping his own lips. Well, I have to take this guy to the police, said the hero number 1, All Might. And Izuku woke from his stupor when the bulky man turned his back. A stone settled in his stomach and a growing urgency tightened his trembling limbs. Wait. I still have to ask you something. And soon he found himself flying through the air, clinging to life as he dangled from his hero's leg. Hey, what do you think you're doing? The man grabbed him by the shoulders and soon they were landing on a nearby rooftop. Despite barely being able to stand on his shaking limbs, Izuku held on. Because he was there, and he might never again have the chance to get an answer from the number 1 hero, the symbol of peace. Wait! He called. Izuku could see the man's apprehension. He read the discomfort in his posture, and his reluctance to stay on the roof as he moved away with measured steps after showing him the way down. I just need to know. Can I be a hero with a weak quirk? The hero paused. Izuku filled his silence with quick, choked words, I'm just a normal guy. With a quirk that is unable to protect me. No one thinks I stand a chance. Suddenly, he stopped. And he felt, rather than saw, the change in the hero before him. The man was surrounded by smoke, and his hunched form shrank, seeming to crumble into himself. In front of him, where once the towering hero had stood, representing the greatest glory in the society of heroes, stood a thin, cachectic man with dark shadows covering his sharp eyes and baggy clothes that seemed to swallow him whole. Izuku thought that he might be dreaming. Or that he had fallen victim to his own will and that it was manifesting itself in his own insecurities and fears. When the man asked him to remain silent, Izuku nodded sternly. And when he showed him the terrible wound in his side and told him the story of his own failure, his own chest tightened with agony and tears stung the corners of his eyes. I'm supposed to be the guy who's always smiling, right? I'm the symbol of peace. People everywhere have to think that I am never afraid. No, that's not true, he thought. His soul ached for him. Izuku crushed the despair growing inside him and listened to the man's words with regret, his sorrow in the form of the last nail in the coffin of his heart. Can you be a hero if you cannot protect yourself? No. I don't think so. He barely registered the man's retreating form. He must be lonely, he thought as tears streamed down his face, hidden by his dirty sleeves. I wish I could thank him for saving me. I'll probably never see him again in person. But fate is a capricious judge, imposing its fate on those who venture beyond the call of duty. And though his throat still burned from the previous villain's abuse, he sobbed over his words as he knelt at the feet of All Might. Because you can be a hero. And a desire blossomed in his chest. That which had lain dormant, waiting in the depths of his soul, growing only in the privacy of his conscience, for he believed in his dream, for he knew that his heart was not a wasteland for his hope, and to behold its blossoming was like watching the promised rain fall through the scent of damp earth, or like listening to the birds singing in the morning, like watching the sunrise after a long black night. I will be a hero. He promised himself. Through the moisture in his eyes, he looked at the slim figure of the hero and made another promise to himself. And I will save you too, All Might. Finally, they were reunited on the beach of Dagobah. Sweat trickled down their foreheads and the sand felt rough against his outstretched legs. They had come a long way. The beach, once an inhospitable dumping ground, now offered a glimpse of the warm sunset. His small, lean body had been hardened by work. His goal, once a vague aspiration, was closer and closer to his grasp. Young Midoriya? Izuku jumped, absorbed as he was by the fall of the last of the afternoon waves. He wiped the excess water from the corner of his lips and looked up at the hero with a nod. What is it, All Might? All Might leaned back on his arms, looked at him for a few seconds and finally asked. Earlier, when we met for the first time, you said that your quirk was weak and that you couldn't protect yourself with it. May I ask you, boy, what is your quirk? Izuku sat up and scraped the edges of his themed canteen with his fingernail, confused by the sudden turn of the conversation. It had not come up during the first months of their training. They had both been busy with the first steps of their plan, conditioning his weak body to a quirk as magnificent as All Might's, implementing a workable routine and an accessible meal plan while Izuku juggled his grades at school. There would be no point in training so hard if he couldn't pass the AU theory exam. But now, halfway through, they were finally in a stable area. The changes in their daily routines had already settled into their lives, and the time had finally come to reveal themselves to the man. Oh, well. You don't have to tell me now if you don't feel comfortable. All Might hastened to reassure. I just want to know if it would interfere with your training or what we can do to accommodate your quirk. All Might waited a few moments. Slowly, determination took over Izuku's nerves. Well, but maybe it's better if I show you. I couldn't describe it for sure myself. He scratched his head, waving his empty bottle in the air. But, well, my mother says I give great hugs. A stunned silence followed his words. What? Unaware of his extreme confusion, the boy turned on his knees to face him fully. Spreading his arms wide, he gave him a dazzling smile and asked in a soft, almost hypnotic tone. Will you accept my embrace, All Might? And the man, unable to resist his apprentice's bright gaze and beaming smile, clenched his fists and nodded, trembling. Sure. Then Izuku stepped closer and wrapped his thin arms, which were getting stronger by the day, around his slender figure. Toshinori's breath stuttered in his chest, his eyes replaced by embers burning against heavy eyelids. He felt his ward's chest rise and fall, vaguely registering Izuku's chin against his own bony shoulder. Heart to heart, Toshinori closed his eyes and allowed himself to breathe for the first time in a long time, feeling as if he had spent his whole life experiencing people from the periphery of his senses, and he was just discovering the bliss of an understanding so deep that it penetrated his core and warmed his bones, filling his heart with affection for a child who shared with him nothing more than an ardent desire to help others. As the evening rolled away its blanket, revealing a deep night broken by the red streaks that still clung to the evening sky, Toshinori closed his eyes and allowed himself to melt into its embrace. But then came the cold. And his eyes widened in alarm as an unfathomable blackness obscured his view of the sunset. The sky turned red and the air grew heavier, thick with smoke, earth, and debris. Behind his narrowed eyes, the hero caught a glimpse of the boy's green hair cropped against the flaming horizon, and all the bliss that had built up in his chest faded like the fire of a candle extinguished between two rough fingers. He felt out of his mind. Victim of an overwhelming depersonalization. Hardly conscious of his own body, he felt his injured stomach dropping to his feet. For on a pile of faceless corpses stood All for One, arms outstretched in silent invitation. "What is this, young Midoriya?" he whispered when he finally found his mouth, his question barely audible, his voice thick with the horror of it all. The boy pulled away from the rigid cage of his arms, laughing softly as the man's trembling fingers refused to let go of his hands, even as he stood on unsteady legs. "This is your interior, All Might. This is my quirk." The boy smiled at him, turning to his worst nightmare with bright eyes and a broad smile. "Now all we have to do is beat him." From the ground rose a thick cloud of gray dust. Broken columns of stone jutted out at sharp angles along a wide walkway made of broken bricks. The walkway floated above a dark void, barely interrupted by crumbling buildings and debris that floated like fiery shavings before their horrified eyes. Midoriya Inko shrank in on herself as she took in the vast destruction around her. In the distance, she noticed that the city continued beyond the tiled street beneath her feet. Gigantic platforms floated in space, interrupted in their decay process, tracing a path that snaked around a tower of dust, dirt, and debris that spun around itself. A vortex formed in the core of the void that stretched as far as her eyes could see. It was a ruined city. But on second glance, she realized. It was her city, an enormous, medieval version of it. The houses seemed tower-like buildings and the dry trees dwarfed her body. Moreover, the familiar brick and cement were replaced by broken marble tiles, the street signs by ornate stone columns, and the office buildings by tall domes and towers lost in the haze of the dust-darkened sky. Sheer terror paralyzed her cold limbs. She tried to dig through her memory, to bring to the surface the idea of her last coherent conception. What had she been doing before she appeared amid such destruction? Had she been at work, another victim of some villain's whim? But she remembered walking home. She had greeted the neighbor on the second floor. She had petted Mr. Satoshi's dog on the stairs. Had she fainted while she was preparing dinner? Perhaps the stove had broken down again, and she had forgotten to check the flame on the rice before turning to the rest of her chores. Did she hit her head? A thought flickered in the confines of her troubled mind, and Inko jerked as an uncomfortable weight settled over her. A thought flickered in the confines of her troubled mind, and Inko jerked as an uncomfortable weight settled over her. Maybe this was just a realistic nightmare, and it was only a matter of time before Izuku came running in to ask him for the computer password. Had she tucked Izuku in before going to sleep? Or had she fallen asleep before adjusting the nightlight, and he had to do it all by himself again? No, she thought. That didn't sound right. She remembered kissing his son's green curls. His All Might pajamas, first-generation All Might, mom, his contented face, his arms. His arms around her. In the distance, a thunderclap broke the silence. Behind the gray curtain of the vortex, massive dark figures were moving. It was impossible to see them behind the thick barrier of wind. She took another look around. Behind her, there was nothing. The road began abruptly, with nothing to hold the walkway in the air. The vast emptiness stretched out, barely interrupted by debris and rocks that had lost the vortex's path. She made a mental note to watch out for these stray objects. She didn't want to be hit by one as she ventured on the precarious path. The ground remained firm under her feet. At this point, she probably wouldn't get any more answers. Until a hero rescued her or she awoke from this strange nightmare, she would have to keep gathering information about her surroundings. So, with uncertainty gnawing a hole in her chest, she moved forward, her hands white from gripping the sleeves of her sweater. She cautiously descended the hallway, dodging piles of rubble, flying rocks, and holes in the floor that gave her a glimpse of the unfathomable nothingness below. She walked along the path for what seemed like hours, but in her panic, it felt like minutes. She was panting, her hands scuffed from climbing over the stones that interrupted the path, and her hair stuck to her forehead from sweat and dirt. Inko felt she was going in circles. And yet, when she looked at the path behind her, she could not see her starting point. She wondered, then, if all her efforts had been in vain. Inko wiped the sweat from her brow with her sleeve and rubbed her burning eyes. Without a clear destination or answers to alleviate her insecurities, what was the point of moving forward? She was about to drop over a fallen pillar when the wind brought her a cry, a familiar call. OM. Adrenaline shot through her veins, and she jumped to her feet, looking around frantically. Was that it? OM. Izuku. She whispered. The pounding of hooves, a thumping in her chest, crushed her breath, and her voice came out as a whisper, barely audible. She tried again, but she was dizzy with fear, and her voice trembled in time with her frantic pulse. Izuku. It was barely a call. Inko looked around, turned her face to the sky, fixed on the towering vortex, and gathered her courage to break the peace of the unnatural landscape. Izuku, she shouted, and the voice finally answered her. Mom! Izuku! Where are you? Inko ran in the direction where she thought she heard her son. Her son, who was also here, was crying. I have to find him. I have to get us out of here. Mom, help me! Horror clasped its cold hands around her throat, and Inko started running. She stumbled along the path, scraping her knee on a rock, but ignored the pain to climb a half-fallen marble staircase that led into a tall, ruined building. Inside, the air was thick with dust, forcing her to blink quickly to clear the dirt from her eyes. She passed through a high archway that was the entrance to a spacious hall that resembled a royal banquet hall, with fine carpets and gilded pictures whose paintings were torn or neglected. Ignoring the strange scene, Inko looked up at another pair of stairs that led to a catwalk on the second floor. From there, she heard her son's frightened cry and hurried up, one hand resting on the ornate railing and the other brushing away the dust that obscured her vision. Once upstairs, a door opened onto a large balcony, and a flash of green appeared out of the corner of her eye. Inko hurried in that direction, and she gasped when she finally reached him. Mom! Izuku! The little 5-year-old stretched out his arms, and Inko stopped in horror. A few steps away from the stone baluster of the balcony. No, Izuku, wait! Her son knelt on a stone slab suspended a few meters from her. The platform, unstable, was floating in the air. Mentally, Inko measured the distance from the baluster. She was about 5 meters from the platform, slightly below it. Mom! Her son cried, and her heart skipped a beat when he voiced, "It's falling." The stone slab crumbled at the edges. That was why Izuku was on his knees, fearing that he would fall through the void and that the platform supporting him would collapse underneath him. Don't move, Izuku. Let me think. She stuttered. Madly, she looked at her surroundings. There was nothing but rubble and dry leaves. None of the stones were long or strong enough to serve as a bridge. Think, Inko. Think. Izuku shouted, and Inko watched in horror as the platform crumbled under his fingers. He barely managed to pull his hand out before losing his balance and falling. Mom! It's okay, Izuku. I'll get us out of here. Just hold on tight, my love. Limbs shaking uncontrollably, Inko climbed over the baluster. The balcony protruded slightly, giving her just enough space to place her feet while she held on with one hand to keep from leaning over the edge. She held out a hand, and her son did the same. Still, the distance between them was too great. There was no way to reach him. Even if he jumped, Inko didn't know if she could catch him in the air without letting go of the baluster. Inko didn't even know if he could bridge the distance. Izuku. Inko's heart was bleeding in her chest. Her son was there, he needed her help, and she couldn't reach him. She felt helpless. She blamed her weakness. Where were the heroes? She needed something, someone, anyone. Mo-. Izuku's call abruptly cut off when another piece of slab crunched beneath him. His tiny body bent over, and Inko watched in horror as her son stuck his little fingers between the cracks in the stone and leaned back onto the unstable platform. A chunk fell, and then his leg dangled in the air. No! Inko's fingers curled over her palms. A cold sweat ran down her body, and she barely noticed when her other hand let go of the baluster to extend it in front of her. Come! She whispered. Come! She curled her fingers and stretched them again. Her son's tiny body shivered, his dark, tear-filled face still pressed against the slab. An idea materialized in her mind, but the outcome was uncertain, and fear clouded her thoughts. She had no choice. She had to do it. She had to save Izuku. My love. She called, and her child looked up and returned her gaze with big, wet eyes. Try to stand up, please. Trust me, she added quickly, putting courage into her words and fixing her expression in a determined one. Izuku frowned and looked at his hands, the space under his knees, and slowly nodded to himself. Cautiously, and as Inko's breathing followed his son's movements, Izuku put one knee underneath him. He pulled the leg in the air and stood on all four legs with both hands underneath his body. His arms were shaking, but his face reflected his concentration. Can you stand up? I think so. But I don't know if I'll last long. He replied hesitantly. Don't worry about it, honey. Just try to stand up. Inko asked her. Carefully, please. She pleaded. Izuku nodded unsurely and propped himself up on his shaky knees. His hands waved in the air, trying to find his balance. Although he wobbled a few times, and Inko's stomach balled as he leaned dangerously over the edge, he finally managed to stand up completely. Good, good. She encouraged him. She raised his hands again and stretched her fingers towards her little boy. And Izuku's body twitched. Her son was startled and wobbled on his feet, whimpering. Inko rushed to calm him down when a risky idea occurred to her. Calm down. It was me. I have an idea. Get back as far as you can. When you reach the edge, run to me. I'll catch you, son. I swear I'll catch you. Izuku looked at her, his huge eyes filled with tears. Inko couldn't imagine her expression. Her face felt cold. The tears had dried on her cheeks, and she felt the sting of dirt under her eyes. But her lips were tight, for she refused to show hesitation in the face of her son's fear. After a short moment of consideration, Izuku nodded. He stepped back, hands clenched into fists and a determined expression on his face, and Inko counted for him. 1, 2, 3. Izuku ran. Barely 3 steps, and he jumped from the platform. Inko's hands followed his path, and when he was only 2 meters away, she used her quirk and pulled. Izuku's body rushed towards her expectant hands. Inko's head throbbed, and sweat ran down her forehead from the effort. But Inko ignored it in favor of catching her flying son. Their hands brushed, and Inko leaned down to hold him. She pulled his body until she finally had him in her arms, barely noticing how they wavered on the edge of the balcony before Izuku reached the baluster behind her back. Mommy, he cried, and Inko buried her face in her viridian locks as relief washed over her like a warm stream of water. Oh, Izuku! You were so brave. My love, my baby. She told him. Come on, we still have to find a way out of here. Carefully, she lifted him over the baluster, and when Izuku had both feet on the other side of the balcony, she hurried to follow. Suddenly conscious of her precarious position, she took his hand, and together, they hurried towards the main corridor where she had started her journey. They had barely reached the stairs to the hall, strangely free of the thick curtain of dust that had overwhelmed her before when a clattering sound broke the silence. The shadows under the debris lengthened. And from the black pools, dark figures with long claws, white eyes, and long, sharp teeth emerged. Izuku's scream was interrupted by the sudden pull of Inko, who did not stop to think about the new threat but hurried to run away from the terrifying figures that seemed to be chasing them. Ignoring the stairs, she ran towards another entrance at the end of the corridor. In the new room, there were spiral staircases around the wall. It looked more like the inside of a tower because of the circular layout. Come on, Izuku, they hurried up the stone stairs. When Izuku's foot missed a step for the second time, Inko pulled his body up with her quirk and levitated him into her arms. At the top of the stairs, the room opened onto a terrace connected to another tower by a rope and wooden bridge that swayed in the air. Behind them, rocks scraped against the empty walls. With no other choice, they ran to the bridge and crossed, holding hands, eyes darting between the footholds on the weathered wooden planks and the sudden bustle on the terrace behind them. She barely registered his feet touching the stone. She turned and quickly searched for the wooden stakes on the other side of the bridge, tugging at the knots in the rope with her quirk. The shadowy figures, crouched over the wood and struggling to climb over each other, staggered as one of the ropes finally gave way to her insistent tug. A handful of the creatures fell over the edge of the bridge, now dangling precariously from a single rope. But another pair held on, claws digging into the wood, and Inko quickly pulled the other stake. One creature was halfway across, and Inko glimpsed a huge mouth full of teeth. In the emptiness of its sockets, she contemplated her own weakness. She was not strong enough. On her own, how could she? "Mom, the rock!" Izuku interrupted her sinking thoughts by pointing to a piece of rubble behind the stake that was still holding on. It was even further away and certainly heavier than her son, but the knot in the rope wouldn't budge, and if they didn't bring down the bridge, the monsters would catch up with them. Inko raised both arms. She pulled hard on the piece of rubble, mentally resisting the fatigue from the increased use of her quirk. The rock moved, slowly at first, then with increasing force until it slammed into the stake, breaking it. The bridge was defeated, and the outstretched claws of the shadowy figure nearly grazed her own hands before it fell with the bridge. "Let's go!" Inko took hold of Izuku's hand, and they hurried further into the tower. The sonorous pounding of their racing hearts mingled with the sound of the wind against the rocks. They passed through a doorway that led to a long hallway with arches on the sides that gave him a glimpse of the breathtaking view of the ruined city. At the end of it, another room with more corridors led to even more rooms. Inko and Izuku made their way through several rooms. All of them led nowhere. "There are more stairs over there, Mom," Izuku huffed. Inko followed his gaze to a door half hidden behind a fallen curtain and resigned herself to another meaningless path. Slowly, they climbed a narrow stairway where they could only walk one at a time. Soon, they found themselves surrounded by an unfathomable darkness. "Mom? I'm here, Izuku." They continued to climb. After a few minutes, they finally saw their silhouettes and a beam of light sliced through what seemed to be a door. Their gasps and the shuffling of their tired feet echoed off the narrow stone walls. As they stepped through the doorway, Inko exhaled with relief as she finally saw the wide, ashen sky again. The pounding of her heart in her ears drowned out everything else. Her hair fluttered in the intense air, and she tasted dust, sand, and copper on her shaky breath. She took a step, then two, across the vast circular platform on which they stood. She felt her son's hand tug at her sleeve and barely registered the hum of his voice, calling to her, warning her of the danger. They were outside. Finally free from the confines of that labyrinthine tower. The strong wind dried the sweat that ran down her neck and ruffled the green curls of her son, who kept tugging at her arm as he pointed to the space above their heads, his mute little mouth moving in a frenzy. The wind? Inko couldn't remember such an intense storm at the beginning of their journey. Well, there was that vortex. The realization set in, and at the same time, her ears came back to her. She had barely heard Izuku scream before a powerful force slammed into her, taking her breath away and shaking her bones with the force of 1,000 truckloads. Her fingers brushed against her son's hand. But before they could make contact, the vortex tore him from her grasp. The last thing she saw before everything went black was his big, green eyes filled with tears. "Mom! Can I be a hero? I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm sorry." The ground was cold beneath her cheek. As if pulled with her quirk, her consciousness floated slowly towards her. For the first time, she became aware of the chill in her limbs, the sting in her eyes, the stillness of the air, and her pounding heart against the stone on which her body rested. Inko blinked, slowly regaining her composure and making a mental inventory of her wounds. She tasted the blood on her lips. A brief twinge on her tongue indicated that she might have bitten it when she fell. Much to her surprise, however, her limbs were intact, and only the familiar fatigue of her earlier escape overwhelmed her. "I am alive." Shuffling her stiff limbs, she knelt. She brushed her hair from her face and looked at the scratches on her hands in amazement. But where am I? Above her was another huge circular platform, stretching as far as the eye could see. The construction was circular, similar to a Roman Colosseum, with huge columns around the circular center. Where? An icy hand, with sharp claws and poison in its fingers, wrapped itself around her heart. Where is Izuku? She jumped to her feet. For a moment, she stumbled. But she quickly sat up and looked around in a frenzy. Izuku! The last thing she remembered was his small hand ripped from her grasp. His curls flew around him, his huge eyes filled with tears. Mom, can I? Izuku! Mom? The call came from the middle of the platform. Inko ran over and noticed the gigantic statue erected above her head. It was as beautiful as it was imposing. A man, made of marble, standing on a pedestal, with rubies in his eyes and his hands crossed on his belly. In his shadow, there was a golden cage. And inside it was her son, kneeling, gripping the bars tightly. Mummy! What is this? I can't get out. Son. Don't worry. Are you all right? Izuku sobbed and nodded shakily. Inko stared at the golden bars, the fist-sized padlock, and its arrangement at the statue's feet. She looked around uneasily, the air felt charged with static. The hair on her arms stood on end, and a tingling at the back of her neck urged her to look up. A star fell from the sky. It was wrapped in fire, covered with white scales and claws like spears. Two massive appendages sprouted from its flanks, wings that in their entire length were almost as wide as the statue was tall. The creature landed on the statue's shoulders. One of its legs landed on the marble-suited man's shoulder, and the other covered his eyes. Only the pearly smile could be seen behind its huge clawed fingers. Two crimson orbs locked onto her tiny form. Inko shuddered in horror as 3 columns of fire erupted from the dragon's jaws, illuminating the entire hall in red as the shadows disappeared behind rubble and rock pillars. Inko stepped back hastily. Far from Izuku, who was still crying at the feet of the statue. The dragon's gaze was still on her. She couldn't draw his attention to Izuku. He couldn't run away. He had no escape. What do you want? Stammered Inko. I'm no threat. I'm harmless. The monster cocked its head to one side and looked at her with something akin to disdain. Then he spread his wings and landed in front of her. He rose imposingly, his vast form silhouetted against the ashen sky. One of his claws rose, and Inko barely managed to get out of the way before it crashed into the ground, scattering rocks and debris everywhere. In the distance, she caught a glimpse of Izuku trying to call out to her, but a glance at her stern face sealed his lips. He had to admit that she couldn't afford the distraction. The dragon roared again, and Inko ran. She felt the heat on her back. The creature stirred, trying to catch her with its fierce claws. A strong gust of air blew some of her hair out, and Inko, scurrying like a mouse fleeing from its hunter, barely managed to take cover behind some rocks. The dragon slammed his tail into a pillar, and a large chunk of the roof supported by the pillars fell behind him. Inko jumped, using her quirk to pull in chunks of rock and throw them at him, but it was useless. Without really looking in the direction she was running, Inko ducked behind one of the last remaining pillars as fire lit up the platform, red as the sunset, and she hurried to crawl behind a pile of rubble, covering her gasping with her sleeve. She flinched as another roar shook the hall, and small pieces of debris fell on her head. But she covered her lips and collected her thoughts, aware of her precarious position. To her right, the hall stretched out, and she saw more stone pillars, some of them toppled after his first attack, in the corridor surrounding the platform. To her left, a crimson sea surrounded an elongated black island. It was a sharp pupil, cut against a blood-red iris. The dragon's eyes looked on her. The column felt icy beneath her fingers. She tasted the ashes in her mouth again and heard her son's cry carried away by the wind. Was this how it ended, after all her efforts? Poor Inko. Once again, she put her hope in a torn pocket. The moment dragged on. Inko thought she might as well devote her last moments to contemplating his image. His silvery scales, his pale curls. His ivory fangs, his broad smile. His black scara, his flaming eyes. At the center of the destruction wrought by his will, Inko pondered her own role in her misfortune. She looked at the barren landscape, the ashen sky, and the violence of her loneliness. Even though tears stung her eyes and breathing the foul air burned her throat, she managed to ignore her terrible circumstances for a moment and thought, how beautiful this landscape could have been. For the sky behind the dust and ruins could have been any number of shades of steel blue and vermilion. And the rubble was part of something bigger, it was columns and decorated slabs and marble torches. And though the sky was gray now, and gray the marble beneath her feet, and gray the rags that covered her tired body, Inko commended her heart to the beauty of what it was. For she once had such a love. That tore down her house and broke her bridges, for it was the foundation of her daily life. And it left her to pick up the pieces of a shattered hope. She filled the vast space he occupied in her life with fear, isolating herself and her grief, retreating into a life of inner submission. Mom, can I? He could have helped him. He was stronger. He was passionate, intelligent, and capable. He could have answered him. But he was gone, the one who had the chance to nurture her son, to ignite in him the same fire that burned in his heart. He was gone, and Inko was left alone. Still unable to leave the passive role of being his wife, Izuku's mother, and Mitsuki's friend. The world was so big, and Inko was so small, so weak and insignificant. How could she support her son, whose heart wants to fight, who stands between the weak and the dangerous, when he can barely stand on his own 2 feet? Her inability to support Izuku filled her with guilt. She knew full well that her fears were just as infectious to Izuku as her happiness. And Izuku deserved the world. He was such a sweet boy. So loving. Inko mourned and rejoiced at the same time because everything touched him. Izuku could always see beyond his eyes. For love does not weaken Izuku, it strengthens him. It occurred to her that that might be his actual quirk. Because if Izuku was an extension of Inko and a shadow of him, his ability to understand the inner struggle of those around him is entirely his own. But he is mine. He's mine, and I want him to grow up. But, he's not just mine, is he? He's mine, and he is his, and I still love him. How could she love him so much without being deeply rooted in her own existence? The fact that he is also part of her husband does not make him any less beautiful in her eyes. Inko loves what makes them alike, his big smile, the passion in his speech, his beautiful curls, and she appreciates what makes them different, his stuttering voice, so different from his steady baritone. His viridian gaze was a mirror of the emeralds in her own eyes. His compassion, in contrast to his raw toughness. Inko's eyes shone, and a piece of marble found its way into her steady palm. There was no weakness in her love, no false love. To have loved him so much was nothing more than the realization and concentration of her own ability to love. No. Inko is strong precisely because she does love. Because, in the face of her destiny, she is not powerless. Love is not only a sentiment. It implies will. And her enduring ability to love is just another manifestation of her enormous will. Inko looked into the dragon's eyes and understood, she wanted to save herself. She wanted to live on. To enjoy her friends and to get promoted in her job. To embrace her quirk, which was not weak but poorly trained. To see Izuku becoming a hero, the best hero. The #1 hero. Inko inflated her lungs, biting the inside of her cheek, and finally nailed the sharp fragment into the center of the black pupil. There is no superiority in her estrangement. Only fear. And Inko was tired of being afraid. The dragon roared. Inko had no time to cover her ears. She staggered out from behind the pillar and watched in amazement as the huge creature staggered backward, crashing into the massive statue and shattering the space above its knees. Inko choked on her breath, for the cage containing her son was just behind the statue, but the dragon, blind in one eye, barely noticed the damage around him. He swayed, and Inko steeled herself, contemplating his position and conceiving a plan. "Hey," she shouted. "Where are you going, you stupid lizard?" The dragon spun around and fixed his fiery gaze on Inko, who was standing with her hands outstretched in front of her. Several rows of teeth emerged from his gaping mouth, long as spears and white as pearls. Inko curled her fingers and spoke over her pounding heart. Didn't you want to eat me? Come. His roar covered the crunch of the stone, and he slowly crawled towards her, tracing a deadly path with his claws, enjoying his superiority, towering over her, wings outstretched at his sides, his mouth glowing with fresh flames. Inko smiled. The dragon rose, jaws wide open, and she pulled with her quirk. The statue collapsed. It leaned over the crack the dragon had made earlier and landed on the beast with a terrifying crunch of stone on stone. Inko hurried away from the thick smoke rising from the ground and pulled her sleeve over her eyes. Silence fell. A few minutes later, the esplanade began to clear. Light broke through the clouds of debris, and slowly, the shape of the beast, one eye still open but staring into the void, was outlined against the dark horizon, his corpse surrounded by enormous pieces of stone and marble. His claws were still outstretched, trying to reach out for his victim. In the crossed hands of the now shattered statue, something shone. Inko approached hesitantly and saw a golden key resting in the statue's palm. That's... She rushed to grab the key and ran, jumping over the debris and moving the rocks with her quirk. Izuku! Mom! Behind a stray board that Inko quickly tossed out of the cage was her son. It looked as if the cage had protected him from the larger debris. He had a few scratches on his face and arms, and he was completely covered in dust. Only his green eyes stood out from his white profile. I have the key. She exhaled. She dropped to her knees and quickly opened the door that separated her from her son. Izuku jumped into her arms as soon as he was out of the cage, clinging tightly to her chest and sobbing into her ear as Inko soothed him with soft murmurs and slow caresses on his back. I've got you, baby. After a long moment, in which mother and son just held each other, talked into each other's ears, and basked in each other's presence, Inko lifted him into her arms. Izuku felt very light in her arms. They sat on one of the broken pillars. The air finally began to clear, and behind the dirt, a dim light emerged and filled them with warmth. I thought I was going to lose you, Mummy. Her son sobbed. It's all right, baby. She answered him. We're all right. Izuku looked at her, his huge eyes tracing her dirty face, her soft smile, and the wrinkles around her eyes. His lip trembled, and he hid his face in her chest as he murmured. Are you sure you are all right? Yes, baby. I'm fine. Actually. Inko exhaled in awe and watched as the light from the sky began to engulf the dreamlike landscape. I feel better than ever. Mommy. Can I be a hero? Yes, Izuku. You can be a hero. XX, June, 22XX. Muzutafu, Japan. Hero analysis for the future. Number 2, number 0, it's my own quirk. Name, Midoriya Izuku. Age of manifestation, 5 years old. Quirk, embrace. Description, what if people's insecurities, traumas and sorrows could be overcome? Through a boss fight. Hero name, All Might Jr., All Hues, Mini Might. Asterisk, in progress, continue brainstorming later. Notes, inside the battle, quirks get stronger. What's the limit for a quirk's power-up? Superscript 1. Can more people join the battle, or is it just me? Can I fight my own battle? Izuku, wait. Where's the fire? Sorry, Mom. I can't find my gloves. I was sure I left them here. Izuku picked up the sofa cushions. He shook them, stunned, and Inko hid her smile behind the spatula in her hand. I'll help you look. Don't worry. Her mother turned off the stove and took off her apron. Together, they searched between the cushions, behind the sofa, and by the TV. Izuku crouched down, pressed his cheek against the carpet, and gasped when he saw his target. There they are. He tried to reach under the couch. His mother, however, merely arched an eyebrow and raised her hands above her head. She flexed her fingers a few times, and the sofa rose several centimeters. Izuku chuckled and hurried to get his safety gloves, because removing electronic waste with bare hands was dangerous, to say the least. Thank you. Now I have to go. My mentor is waiting for me to continue my training. A shiver ran down his spine, and Izuku suppressed the grin that threatened to split his lips. What a privilege to be able to call All Might his mentor. Wait, don't forget your bento. His mother went back to the kitchen. She returned a moment later with a double box wrapped in a green handkerchief with white bunnies on it. Here. I packed 2 bentos, one for you and one for your mentor. Don't forget to invite him for dinner one of these days. It would be a pleasure to meet the hero who takes so much time to train my baby. Izuku nodded, a little unsure. He wondered how to approach the man with the invitation. For such an excitable and exuberant idol, he was a very private person. He said goodbye to his mother with a kiss and an embrace. When he wrapped his arms around her neck, her face lit up, and Izuku felt his mood lighten at her joy. He stumbled out of the door, rushed by the sight of the rising morning, and hurried to meet his teacher, hero number 1, All Might. The strongest man in the world. Toshinori Yagi felt like the weakest person in the world. On top of a mountain of corpses, bricks, and rubble stood the silhouette of a monster. Its dark shape stood out against a white horizon. Its large hands ended in sharp claws, red eyes, burning like embers, glowed on a faceless face. His smile was broad, and the outline of his puckered lips revealed little more than an unfathomable crimson void. Sweat soaked his forehead. Yagi was struck dumb with horror. With a sharp exhalation, his body swelled, and his muscular form came to him with purely instinctual ease. He moved his stiff limbs and stood in front of the young Midoriya, who had remained strangely silent and contemplative. He is big, he said. Too big, he meant. For the beast before him towered easily over him, and in his memories, their gazes had been almost even. The boy looked up at him. His huge green eyes roamed over Yagi's darkened expression, and something in his frown seemed to move his young apprentice, for he answered. The things that hurt us often seem bigger than we are. The words died in his mouth. Yagi just looked at his apprentice. And in the calm of his expression, he found his composure. He nodded once. He turned his attention back to the monster, and it returned his gaze, impassive. The man, the nightmare, raised his arms. Numerous shafts, black as tar, emerged from his feet. Dark, grotesque figures emerged from the portals. Their hands were clawed, and some had long, twisted, sharp horns. In their voracious mouths were 2 rows of very white, long teeth, and their red eyes gleamed in their haggard faces. One by one, the demons rose. They formed a circle around them while the Demon King watched them from a distance, like a boot on an ant. Like a bird looking at a worm. You think you can defeat me with this army? I have already defeated you once. And I'll do it again if I have to. All Might raised his arms, raising his guard and glaring at his enemy over his fists. He had not expected the sardonic laughter. Least of all, his voice, contemptuous and snickering as he replied. You have not yet earned the right to fight me. And All for one stretched out his arms in their direction. Behind them, a huge portal opened. It sucked in air, swallowing Yagi's sharp exhalation, Izuku's surprised cry, and the demon's malicious laughter. Yagi dug his legs into the stone, unwilling to let his mortal enemy out of his vision, but the sight of Midoriya's green curls stole his attention, and he turned just in time to grab his arm as he flew past. Young Midoriya, he shouted. All Might. The power of the portal was immense. The boy was sucked up to the waist. He clung to the hero's hand, his lip caught between his teeth. Suddenly, his eyes became unfocused, staring into the void, and the boy slowly released his grip. Young Midoriya. The hero tightened his grip, though only slightly, for fear of hurting the boy. The force of the portal had sucked him down to his torso, and Yagi debated whether pulling harder would be beneficial or deadly. His thoughts were replaced by fear when Midoriya released his fingers. He tried to grab his wrist, but the boy pulled his arms back. Yagi watched in horror as the portal swallowed his apprentice. He didn't think twice as he threw himself through the portal right behind him. Master! Master, don't go. Let me go with you. Let me help you. Beyond a golden gate lay a beautiful field. As far as the eye could see, the morning sun caressed the green hills. Flowers danced in the breeze, and their soft music gave the scene an ethereal quality. It was a dreamlike landscape. What is this feeling? On the other side was Yagi. Looking at the landscape through the golden bars, crouched behind a big, pale brick wall that stretched around the ancient village. The beautiful sight warmed his heart, and an unseen force settled on his shoulders. Yagi struggled to look away from the verdant world on the other side of the wall, spitting to soothe the lump in his throat. Around him, there were numerous brick houses with red-tiled roofs and small gardens under the windows. It reminded him of a picturesque German village he had once visited on a work trip with his friend David. To his left was a small well with an abandoned bucket on one side, and to his right was his boy, Midoriya, hanging from a branch by the side of the road. Young Midoriya! He rushed to his apprentice's aid. With ease, thanks to his imposing height, he managed to pull down the boy from the tree and watched as he shook the leaves from his hair with a stunned expression. Why did you appear in the middle of the street and me at the top of a tree? Yagi smiled and shook the curls of the boy's hair, causing another pair of leaves to fly away. I don't know, my boy. I think you know better. Maybe you're right. Midoriya scratched his head and shrugged as a blush lit up the freckles on his cheeks. My boy. All Might began, and his sudden severity startled his young pupil. Why did you let go of my hand? We had him in front of us. I could have defeated him. Midoriya pursed his lips, his huge green eyes roaming over the hero's unwavering expression. He opened his mouth once, twice, and finally exhaled, defeated, as he bowed his head in shame. Forgive me. He began. It's just that. I think he was right. Yagi frowned. The boy waved his hands in alarm, interrupting his dark thoughts. Well, about what he said about us not earning the right to fight him. What do you mean? I think every battle has to take its course. He clarified. And if he is the king, we must overcome his minions first. Besides, he added in a hurry as if he had just caught the thought and was trying to keep it locked between his lips. We showed up in the middle of a fortress, didn't we? And now we're in the city. It wouldn't be unreasonable to think that the fortress is in the center of these walls, and we have to make our way there to fight him in the end. Yagi considered his words and stroked his chin as he thought aloud. You may be right. He concluded. Then we should get going. The boy nodded, and together, they made their way away from the beautiful dreamscape. That peaceful land, the serene horizon. The life he left behind when he decided to become the symbol of peace. They walked for several minutes. The town was silent, the only sound being their footsteps echoing on the stone path. Yagi looked at his pupil and saw him looking at the low buildings and brick houses with a questioning look on his face. What is this, young Midoriya? He asked. You said it was part of your quirk, right? How does it work? Midoriya straightened up, his eyes finally leaving the anomalous setting. Well, my mom and I have a few theories. He held up a hand and began to count with his fingers. At first, we thought it simply eased the worries and reduced the stress of those I hugged. Because that was how it worked. At first. So it wasn't always like this? Yagi gestured around, startled. No. My hugs were just that. Great hugs. The boy played with his clasped hands. But then it revealed itself as you see it. After an incident with my mother, we discovered it was much more deep. Is it the same for everyone? His apprentice pursed his lips, and his cheeks flushed. And it suddenly occurred to Yagi. Don't tell me. You've never used it before? I have used it before. The boy hastened to reassure. With my mother. By accident. And it wasn't exactly like this. It was scary at first, but then we got out safely. All Might opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, stunned and slightly shaken. My boy. I trust you. But this could be dangerous. If this is my mind. And he turned a dark look to the silent city. We must be careful. I have faced many villains, and I am no stranger to violence. It could be dangerous. His expression was severe, and his tone was firm, hoping to deter the boy from endangering himself in the future. He did not expect the calm smile nor the sparkle in his eyes when he answered him. "Don't worry, All Might," the boy said. "After all, I'm here with you." The man inhaled deeply, holding the thought carefully, lost in contemplation. "Yes," he thought after a few moments of deliberation. "I am the symbol of peace. The number one hero, All Might. His mentor." He clenched his hands into fists and steeled his resolve. "I can keep him safe. Besides," Midoriya added as an afterthought, "the reward makes the fight worthwhile." Reward? There was some commotion in the distance. The hero's attention was drawn away from the kid, and both jumped as heavy footsteps echoed across the stone. "Looks like we'll have to continue this conversation later." Yes. Many demonic figures stood in their way. They had red skin, long claws, and black horns. Their eyes glittered, and thick saliva dripped from their tongues. The demons, his servants, grinned maliciously. And without giving them a moment to prepare, they rushed towards them. All Might struck the first creature in the jaw. Its fangs flew, and its eyes bugged out as it hit the ground with a clatter that shook the entire street. "Stay back, young Midoriya," he commanded, extending an arm towards his apprentice. One by one, the demons lunged at him, and the hero met them with his fists, open palms, and boots. One of the demons tried to escape his grasp and ran toward the boy with its claws out and its jaws open. Only a few steps from the boy, the hero stepped into its path and caught the demon by the horns. With a snarl, he lifted the monster and hurled it at the rest of the creatures. When the smoke cleared, there was a deep crater in the middle of the street, and several demons had been crushed beneath the barrage of rocks and bodies caused by the wrath of the strongest. All Might considered the rest of his enemies and quickly darted in that direction. Through the dust, debris, and shadows that covered his face, only his white smile and blue irises were visible. The pile of corpses continued to grow, and a few minutes later, the street was silent again. Yagi wiped his sweat with his arm and searched for Midoriya with his eyes. He exhaled with relief when he saw him at the side of the road, worried but otherwise unharmed. He nodded to the boy, and they set off again on a path that seemed to rise a little higher with each step. Nearer, a bright wall rose with a thick gate of silver bars. It seemed then that the city was circular, situated on a terrain similar to a large hill, and they were in the area between the outside and the next wall. "We are near the gate," Midoriya said, noticing the same thing as Yagi. "I wonder if the fortress is on the other side or if there's still some way to go." Yagi frowned and considered the imposing height of the looming wall. "If I jump high enough, I might be able to see the other side." Midoriya nodded, pleased with the plan. "Very well. Be careful, All Might." Yagi smiled at his pupil. He took a deep breath, barely noticing the anomalous ease with which the air reached his wounded lungs, and jumped into the air. Soon, the houses became small, the red-tiled roofs tiny dots in the distance, and his apprentice's bright green mane swayed in the wind like a clover in the park. Finally, he passed the high wall. In the distance, he noticed another city spread across the higher ground. The houses seemed to be of better quality. There were more 2- and 3-story buildings, the houses were larger, and the streets were paved with cobblestones instead of stone. Further away, surrounded by another wall, were 4 towers. He concluded that this was the Demon King's fortress and that it was in the middle of the 3rd wall. He considered the route for a moment. Perhaps he could return for the boy and take the journey by air. Surely it would be faster and safer, and they would have a better view of any obstacles in their way. An object reflected the morning light. In the distance, a pale wooden bow flashed gold, and All Might barely dodged the arrow that would have surely blown his head off. "What the?" The creature at the wall loaded another arrow into its bow. All Might ducked and kicked himself back to the ground. The new arrow clipped a lock of his hair, and the hero frowned at the impassive stance of the pale creature on the wall. "All Might," cried Midoriya as he crouched down a few steps away from him. "I'm fine, my boy." He grunted. "Looks like the walls are protected. We won't be able to get over them. It can't be that easy, can it?" The hero thought to himself. "From what I could catch a glimpse of, we still have 2 more walls to go through. This city surrounds the inner walls, so we'll have to continue in a straight line to the gates. Midoriya nodded. Good. Then we should keep going. The next wall is not far away. Aren't you tired, son? We've been walking for a few hours? The hero cocked his head in confusion. Time passes differently here. The boy clarified, and Yagi exhaled in relief. Oh, good. So I don't have to worry about someone finding us passed out on the beach? Midoriya chuckled. No. For the outsider, it's probably only been a few minutes. He frowned suddenly, worried. What about you, All Might? You still won't let go of your hero form. Don't worry about me, my boy. The man laughed, affably. Truth be told, I don't feel that tired yet. It must have something to do with the strange way time passes here, as you say. His apprentice pursed his lips. He scanned his huge figure with questioning eyes. If you say so. He finally replied with some uncertainty. But if you need a break, we can find a place to sit for a moment. I'll protect you while you rest. The boy straightened, hands on hips, and Yagi smiled proudly. Sounds good to me. He said. If I need a break, I'll let you know. They kept on going. On the way, a demon jumped out of an open window, and Yagi quickly dispatched it with a well-placed blow between its horns. By the time they reached the gate of the second wall, the sun was high in the sky. The only thing that separated them from the next city was the thick bars of silver. Stay back, Yagi ordered his apprentice. He let out a yell and hit the gate with his fist, and nothing happened. What? He tried again. Then he realized that his knuckles had stopped inches from the door, suspended in midair by a pale layer draped over the intact bars. It's a barrier, exclaimed Midoriya. Confused, Yagi took 2 steps back. Suddenly, he was blinded by a flash of golden light and jumped away as another portal manifested from the barrier. Watch out! He stepped between Midoriya and the new threat. More demons? He wondered. Or strange creatures like those on the wall? A pale hand emerged from the dark pool, and a mysterious face followed. Its eyes were closed, and thin golden lines ran down its smooth cheeks. It looked like a marble statue of a woman. Her hair and skin were white, a golden dress covered her slender figure, and her hands were bound together with a necklace of golden pearls. On her head floated a 7-pointed crown, and from her back spread 2 enormous wings. The woman, the angel, towered over mentor and student. She was a head taller than the hero, and her impassive face twitched in his direction when Midoriya's audible gasp broke the silence. Her feet, the boy pointed out, and Yagi noticed the thick black shackles wrapped around her ankles. The angel spread her wings, her feathers were like golden daggers, sharp and metallic. She ducked her head once, wrapped the pearl necklace around one wrist, and lunged at the duo. Yagi reacted just in time, raising his arms to cover his face before the angel landed a blow on his forearms. The blow knocked him back a few steps. He felt the area, surprised by the dull pain emanating from it. She is not an ordinary opponent, he concluded. Her tremendous strength and unique build set her apart from the minor demons they had met before. The angel looked at him. Then she turned her eyes to his apprentice, who had retreated as soon as the fight started, and Yagi's heart skipped a beat. Before he realized it, he was already on top of her. Your opponent is me. He gave her a kick that knocked the dirt out of the way. The angel staggered for a second, then spread her wings to cover herself before the hero could land more kicks to her torso. His blows to the wings echoed with a metallic clink. It was indeed a golden shield, covering her like a golden dome. But she can't attack while maintaining this defense. He stepped back for a moment. The angel spread her wings. She stretched her arms as the hero threw a large stone at her. When she noticed the projectile, it was too late to avoid it. Yagi smiled, but the angel did something unexpected. She pulled out 3 feathers and used them as daggers. The stone turned to dust in an instant. She is fast. Yagi ducked, barely dodging 2 of the feathers. Covered by the dust of the rock, the 3rd feather advanced unseen. It dug in over his shoulder, drawing a grunt from the hero. The angel gave him no time to recover. She lunged at him, and the hero met her halfway. They exchanged blows, Yagi dodging some and connecting a few, but she was quick, and he soon had to retreat, stunned by the force of her attack. Her expression never changed. She was a statue, frozen in her melancholy state. But now her face was furrowed and cracked, and white dust fell from her broken forehead. Yagi took the opportunity to catch his breath. He looked at the angel, her familiar pose, and her beautiful face, and felt an invisible weight in the pit of his stomach. All Might, look out! In his contemplative state, he was oblivious to the angel's movement. Spinning as she ran, she spread her wings and sliced through the air. All Might leaped away from the blades and propelled himself with his legs in a somersault over her head. Behind her back, he grabbed her wings. A powerful kick brought her to her knees. Yagi raised his arms above her head, ready to deliver a final blow. But the angel turned and looked at him through her closed eyelids, golden tears still streaming down her cold face. Then she ripped off her wings. Midoriya's audible gasp echoed his own. Blood gushed from her wounded shoulder blades, staining her golden dress. The metal appendages fell to the ground with a loud clatter, and the woman rose in an impressive display of speed and agility, delivering a powerful kick to his jaw. The shackles on her ankles broke under the force of the blow, and the hero was sent flying. He crashed into the side of a building and barely had time to shield his face from the debris and bricks before she was back on top of him. She sacrificed her wings in exchange for greater strength and agility. How audacious! He wrapped an arm around her neck, pulling her into a headlock and forcing her punches to stop. She continued her attack. With a well-aimed elbow to his wounded side, she managed to break his entire guard. Ack! He felt his form begin to weaken. He gasped, and the angel grabbed his shirt collar, sending him flying across the street. All Might! Stay back, boy! The angel stepped out of the rubble, rising to her full, imposing height. Yagi felt his resolve falter. But the worried face of his student filled his vision, and the hero balled his fists as he regained his footing. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something. Midoriya was crouching by the discarded wings. He had a look at the hero, then at the discarded appendages. Nodding decisively, he threw him one of the larger feathers, perhaps the length of his forearm. The hero caught the feather in midair and turned to face the angel as she came at him with her arms raised. He ducked out of her grasp, ducked under her guard, and with a mighty yell, plunged the improvised dagger into her chest. Tears spread around the wound. Instead of blood, a golden glow escaped from the slits in the marble skin, and the angel staggered back. Her face was still impassive, but her hands fell to her sides, and as her ankles brushed against her discarded wings, she fell to her knees. He glanced at the boy crouching a few meters away. His apprentice stammered and slowly lowered his hands, unsure what to do next. Yagi approached him. He put a big hand on Midoriya's shoulder and gave him a thoughtful smile. The boy smiled back hesitantly, and they both looked at the defeated angel at their feet. The angel bowed her head. Her mouth twisted, and her eyes finally opened, revealing two sorrowful orbs. The crown fell off her head and rolled slowly towards their feet. Suddenly, a circular pattern appeared on the barrier, bright as the sunlight, as if carved into the surface with golden ink. Midoriya bent down. With cautious fingers, he held the crown above his head. To his surprise, the pattern on the barrier glowed, and 7 gems shone around a circle of light. I think we have to put the crown on the surface, the boy whispered. Cautiously, Yagi and Midoriya approached the barrier. Midoriya stood on tiptoe and placed the crown on the undulating surface. The barrier swallowed the object, and a rainbow of light colored the entire surface. What? What else is missing? Yagi asked as the light pulsating at the center of the pattern failed to disappear. Midoriya pursed his lips and put a hand to his chin, muttering. A barrier that needs a key. The pattern indicated the angel's crown. When we placed it, the 7 jewels lit up. But perhaps. His eyes flashed, and he exclaimed, All Might, that looks like a handprint. In the center of the bright spot, Yagi identified another jewel. It did not glow, unlike the other 7 arranged around the handprint. His apprentice looked at his hands, shook his head, and looked carefully at Yagi's. My boy? Yes, yes. The boy concluded with a smile. It has to be you. The hero looked down at his hands in confusion. His apprentice's expression was relaxed and welcoming. And trusting his calm resolve, the knowing gleam in his eyes, he placed his hand on the barrier. The gem glowed under his palm. He could feel the warmth of its light running up and down his arm. It wasn't painful. It was just warm. The barrier fell. The silver bars lifted as if powered by some hidden mechanism, and they soon faced the sight of a new city. Excellent work, my boy. Yagi ruffled his hair, and the boy blushed up to his ears, stammering thanks. Yagi took one last look at the fallen angel. Even though her back was turned to the door, she was looking at him as well. Yagi looked down at her bare back, where her wings had been resting. She mumbled inaudible words, clutching the beads between her hands as cracks formed on the marble surface of her face. At her feet lay the broken shackles that had once bound her legs. I'm sorry. He apologized to himself as he moved on to his next challenge, but I have to keep moving. Finally, he looked away from the sad scene. He could not dwell on his melancholy for too long. Sometimes, leaving something behind is the only way to move on. He did not see the angel fade into a golden glow, nor the tender smile she gave to her beloved apprentice. Master, don't leave me. I'm sorry, Yagi. She was smiling. But you must keep living. On the other side of the gate was another city. Although it had the same layout as the city on the previous wall, the houses were in better condition. There were more 2- and 3-story buildings. The gardens were larger, and iron fences surrounded the pretty houses. The midday sun shone high in the cloudless sky, blue as a topaz, warming their heads and causing small rivers of sweat to run down their red cheeks. Despite the unfavorable surroundings, Yagi and Midoriya continued on their way. They walked through the desolate city, listening to the gentle breeze and the echo of their heavy footsteps between the stone walls for what appeared to be hours. Yagi watched as his pupil eagerly followed his long strides. How are you feeling, my boy? I'm fine. The boy replied. For a moment, Yagi doubted his answer. After all, his flushed face accentuated his freckles, and his hair was even messier than usual. He looks like a strawberry, to be honest. All right. He conceded after a few moments of composure. You see that, All Might, those stairs? Yagi followed his gaze. The street between the buildings wound like a serpent into a huge square with a white fountain at its center. Beyond it, steps led up to a large archway with closed double gates leading into another wall. Is that the next gate? The boy asked. Contrary to the previous gates, this one was solid, unlike the gold and silver bars they had seen earlier, but like 2 bronze shields that would not let them see beyond the street. It could be. It goes into the wall like the previous gates. This one looks different, though. That's right, my boy. Midoriya rubbed his chin and wondered aloud, but it's strange. This is almost too easy, he said. But then he was startled and waved his hands nervously before correcting himself. I mean, not because it's right, but because we haven't met any demons yet. You're right. Mentor and student looked at each other hesitantly. Suspicious, they intoned in unison. We have no choice. Let's head for the door. He clenched his fists and mentally contemplated the dull throbbing in his side. The battle with the angel had been an arduous one. He didn't want to imagine what other opponents they would encounter later. Minutes later, they were standing in the middle of the square. The large fountain, made of white stone, was surrounded by short hedges of colorful flowers. Numerous statues decorated the patches of green grass, and iron benches lined the sides of the square. But the fertile trees and the opulence of the decor only served to contrast with the desolation of the city. Perhaps it was an ideal life. But it was as rich in luxury as it was in solitude. At this sight, Yagi found no joy, but misfortune. Beyond the fountain, there was another stone path. It led to wide steps that led to an arch several meters high. Next to the arch, guarding the gates, was another statue. This one, however, stood out from the others. It was bent like a wilted lily and had a hooded cloak covering its head. Its shadowed face was plain. Only the contours of its eyes were outlined in the steel. And between its hands, it held a large, empty banner. Yagi took his apprentice by the wrist, gently so as not to frighten the boy, and together they reached the stairs. They climbed them, aware of the suffocating silence that had fallen over the square, and stood at the gate. They studied the bronze gate with critical eyes. Midoriya stepped forward, hand outstretched to touch it, but a movement out of the corner of his eye alerted the hero, who quickly grabbed the boy's half-raised arm. Wait! Look! The statue had moved. One of its hands was still holding the mast of the banner. The other was clenched into a fist at its side. Yagi looked sternly at the anomalous figure and slowly bent down to pick up a loose stone from the ground. Then he threw it at the gate. Before the rock made contact with the metal, a blur of movement halted its path and the rock exploded into 1,000 pieces that fell like crumbling sand at their feet. Midoriya went pale and squeezed the hand that was still holding his elbow. Yagi did not realize his grip had tightened until a small gasp escaped Midoriya's half-open lips. "Forgive me, my son. It's fine. Don't worry." He soothed his mentor, still holding his semi-open hand. You saved me, after all. That was scary. It must be his duty to protect these gates, Yagi theorized. Though the speed of his reaction to one of my throws, no less. He looked again at the hooded figure. In contrast to the angel, this one was made of steel, like an ancient piece of medieval armor, and there was no expression on its face. It was more like a plain mask with two round eyes of the same silver color as its body, which, though shapeless, had a more masculine appearance. Like the angel, however, this individual was tall. He towered like Yagi, like the walls around him, imposing and impenetrable. For a second, he wondered if that was how the young Midoriya saw him, like a closed door, larger than life itself. An effigy of victory. An audacious fantasy. Look, its banner is. The statue had returned to its original position, both hands holding the mast of the banner. Suddenly, dark lines appeared on the cloth, and a legend was written on the previously empty surface. In the realm of fear and the dark abyss profound, where 1,000 shadows dance to the wind's sound, a hero rises with courage and steadfast will, seeking the secret to conquer, resolute still. Clad in armor of steel, with a soul ablaze, he rides forth to the challenge that waits in the haze. 10,000 eyes of malice, piercing and stark, challenge him from darkness, relentless and dark. For triumph here will pave his path ahead, to the final battle against the Demon King, Dread. 0/10,000. What? Exclaimed Midoriya after reading the text on the banner. What does this mean? Triumph here will pave his path ahead, Yagi read again. It is clear that this is the right way to the Demon King's fortress. But how do we open the gate? Behind him, the crunching of stone on stone broke the silence. Back in the square, a slab in front of the fountain had come loose from the ground, revealing a square tile gleaming gold. Yagi looked at the scene, then his gaze returned to the writing on the banner. 0/10,000. It's a countdown, Midoriya muttered. But, a countdown for what? The tile in front of the fountain was still glowing. The light pulsed slowly, inviting. Midoriya followed his gaze, and Yagi watched the reflection of the light in his apprentice's pupils. The boy opened his mouth once, then closed it. At the hero's raised eyebrow, he nodded quickly. And together, they walked down the stairs. Yagi wasn't sure what his challenge would be. But remembering the stooped posture and the statue's plain face, one thing was clear: they would not pass without his approval. Yagi's relationship with Gran Torino was forged in the fire of death, the death of Nana. Before that terrible battle, the contact between the hero and Yagi had been brief, circumstantial even. Although Yagi was Nana's successor and Gran Torino was the woman's best friend, the hero and the student did not have much in common. His cold, down-to-earth attitude contrasted with Nana's optimism and enthusiastic fervor, and his scowl and open disagreement with Yagi's methods only served to widen the gap between the two. Yagi hit the ground hard, struggling to catch his breath. "Is that all you got, kid? Don't be too hard on him. He's doing his best." Gran Torino glanced over to Yagi, then down to Nana. "He's your successor." And that was all he said. It was many years later, after he had worked his way up the popularity charts, and only after his position as an icon within the Society of Heroes had been well cemented, that Yagi paused to consider the initial reluctance of his second mentor. To condemn his reluctance with such frivolous levity would be unfair to the man. For within the vision of this quirkless child, the mad orphan who interrupted a villainous attack with nothing more than a lead pipe, foreshadowed the tragic loss of his best friend. Yagi became the personification of her downfall. A ninth for the eighth. Another rung on the ladder to the precipice. How could Yagi resent his mentor's pain? The two men may not have had much in common, but there was one thing that they did share: their grief. Because after Nana, it all seemed meaningless. What use was being the greatest hero, always smiling, if she wasn't there to see it? Though he knew the risks of their work, and she confessed to him the threat that loomed over the heads of those who inherited her quirk, Yagi never dared to think of a life without his teacher, his mentor, his mother in anything but blood. He had never imagined what a challenge it would be for him to close his heart to bitterness. How could his peers be so happy, so calm, so oblivious to the deep sorrow that would find its way through the cracks in his facade? If she wasn't there, what would he do with all his affection, all the love and pride he could never confess? Where would Yagi hide his smile so it would not meet with her absence and wither away forever? He did not think for a moment how corrosive her absence would be to his soul, how her departure would tighten like a rope around his throat, nor how the loss would make him wander the halls of UA, numb, remembering her face and wondering how long it would take to lose the memory of her voice. Yagi-kun, Yagi-kun. For to Gran Torino, he was only Toshinori, the eighth successor of One for All. But before him, and Night Eye in his residency in the United States, and before All Might, One for All, and the symbol of peace, he was Nana's Yagi-kun. The ward of that woman who went beyond her role as mentor and took him in when he was nobody. Just a helpless young man, an awkward boy with a dream. "I want to save people." Gran Torino scolded his ignorance. His dream was idealized at best, and fantasized at worst. Under his harsh scrutiny, Yagi saw himself alienated from reality, projecting his feelings onto a world that did not fit his distorted view of society. Nevertheless, Nana trusted him. She trusted him with her secret, with her quirk. Her love was freely given, essentially an act of her will. How could Yagi ever overlook the depth of her sacrifice? So Yagi swallowed his bitterness and stood up, no matter how many times the pain threatened to knock him down. He faced Gran Torino, who was stoic and impassive but shared his shame. Only the two of them understood the depth of their sorrow, and they were like two survivors of a fierce battle. Every day, they trained until the sun went down, aware of the fragility of the other's feelings and how they had to rebuild their will every morning. When he turned 18, Yagi followed his orders to cross the ocean. For in his order, he hid his concern, and it was perhaps only in this way that he could protect Nana's ward. And Yagi succeeded. He became the #1 hero. And though the horror still seeped through his cracks, the fire in his heart was finally contained. The flame is never extinguished, but it is dimmer. Yagi can reach it, contemplate it from afar, fan it with the memory of his unfulfilled promises, and quench it with the coldness of his tears. It is a festering catastrophe in his chest, an unceasing storm. But it is also a torch that burns for the illumination of his purpose, ready to be passed on to the care of its next bearer. His crown and his sword. His sorrow and his guide. Yagi contemplates his mentor's decision when he thinks of his pupil. During their sessions on the beach, when he sees him so determined, brave, and passionate, Yagi reflects on the value of what he is preparing to give him. He thinks about how One for All is the measure of his time and how the shadow of his monument has darkened his life. He remembers the grim promise of the clock that hangs over his head, and the torment that it would eventually bring upon his boy. Nevertheless, the hero's life prepared him for the risky game, the struggle, the bliss, the joy of uncertainty. The relentless ticking of time is silenced by the excited murmur of his pupil. And when he sees his smile, and when they share a refreshing drink as they watch the red sunset, he thinks, maybe the suffering, the pain, and the sadness make sense in the end. Maybe that is the price of his peace. Even if his world is shattered and he loses his company, the morning, and the salty sea air, it is good that it happened so Izuku could enjoy it for a while. He will be a hero. And Yagi could bet his heart on it. Demons. 10,000 demons. All shapes and colors. Obscene creatures with shapeless limbs and sharp claws. Some had wings. Others had numerous fangs. In the distance, the hero caught a glimpse of a creature with 6 eyes. Beneath the golden tile was a hidden mechanism. As Yagi and Midoriya approached it, they noticed the piston under their feet. It wasn't until Yagi hesitantly placed a foot on the tile that an earthquake shook the foundations of the square. The doors of the houses and buildings around them opened to reveal horde after horde of fiendish monsters. Soon all they could hear was the shuffling of feet, the hissing of the beasts, the cracking of knuckles against stone, and the gnashing of teeth behind their hungry grins. Immediately, they were surrounded. Yagi grabbed Midoriya's shoulder and put him behind him. But the creatures formed a circle around them. Not a single space was left unoccupied by their filthy forms. Yagi's heart clenched in his chest, and a sense of helplessness burned within him. His eyes wandered in a frenzy and finally landed on the fountain. His sudden movement drew a surprised cry from his apprentice. Yagi grabbed him under the armpits and, in one fluid motion, threw him to the top of the fountain. The boy landed staggering and hurried to hold onto the statue at the top of the fountain, a small marble figure of a child pointing to the sky while holding a stone scroll. Yagi turned just in time to avoid a claw that would have torn his nose off. All Might! Hang in there! He threw a powerful punch at the filthy creature who had dared to take advantage of his confusion. Be my eyes, boy! He took a deep breath. Just as another of the malevolent creatures lunged at him with its claws raised and its jaws open, revealing the pool of acid at the back of its throat, he struck hard at the air that separated them, creating a powerful whirlwind that decimated the beasts a few meters away. All Might, the number has changed. He glanced at his pupil. Sure enough, the same numbers they had been looking at had appeared on the scroll the statue was holding. 26/10,000. Shit, he whispered under his breath. He had hoped the numbers did not indicate how many enemies he needed to defeat to get to the next area. Okay, he sighed wearily. Let's do it. And with that, the hero set out to defeat the monsters. For what seemed like eons, he fought and encountered many creatures with various peculiarities. Some had sharp fangs. Others had thick steel skin, spiky horns, or poisonous tails. One of the beasts approached him with both arms replaced by giant wolf heads. The hero dispatched it by throwing it into the gaping maw of a hulking creature made entirely of lava. 698/10,000. On your 5 o'clock. The hero turned just in time to avoid a spiked ball attached to the head of one of the demons. He grabbed the creature by the neck, shielding himself with his body from the attack of a dragonfly-winged monster. Then he flung the beast towards a bug creature trying to climb up the fountain toward his ward. Something caught his leg. It was a long green tongue belonging to a creature with a face resembling a foreign toad. The fabric of his pants began to smoke, and the hero jumped into the air as he felt the sting of the acid pierce the thin fabric of his sweatpants. He rose several meters, watching the small figure of Midoriya still clinging to the fountain as he hurled rock fragments at the demonic faces approaching him. Just a little bit more. Yagi growled. And soon, his instincts proved correct when out of the corner of his eye, he saw a golden flash of lightning flying towards him at full speed. He spun in the air, lifted his leg to throw off the slimy appendage's grip, and propelled the creature until it hovered in front of him. The monster grinned, victorious, and just as it opened its huge, grotesque mouth to wrap its tongue around his neck, a golden arrow pierced the space between its eyes. The guardian angel of the wall watched from a distance, impassively. Yagi smiled, victorious, and rushed into the square. He pulled the golden arrow from the beast's skull and hurled it into the center of the battlefield. The arrow exploded in a shower of light and shrapnel. Blood and gore, black and sickening, painted the floor of the square. 807/10000. Yagi landed heavily on the back of a winged creature. Mercilessly, he ripped off its red wings and lunged at the head of a goat-eyed beast as it landed on a burning lamppost. One by one, he laid waste to the villains who stood in his way, and along with the number carved in the stone, his thirst for justice grew as the battle dragged on. 1269/10000. Yagi grabbed a creature by the horns. Then, he detonated the bomb attached to the tail of a robotic beast. 1307/10000. With deadly precision, the hero sliced through the beasts, cutting through his enemies with his unstoppable strength. The earth trembled beneath his feet as bodies fell around him. 2788/10000. 3101/10000. 3500/10000. Midoriya shouted a warning, and Yagi ducked just in time to avoid a large boulder that shattered into pieces as it hit a melee of creatures. He wiped the sweat from his brow with his sleeve. The horde around him did not let up. Along with his resistance, his resolve began to weaken. Still, he knew he could not stop. Everyone was counting on him. His country, the younger heroes, his followers. His successor. So he kept on fighting. For 120/10000. Come. He stretched out his arms and grinned at a massive creature with the body of a dog and 3 snake heads. The beast roared, shaking the foundations of the square, and lunged at him. Yagi ducked, bracing himself for the collision, and when he caught the yellow of the beast's eyes, he slammed his fist into the ground. Huge boulders flew in front of him. Picking up the largest, he spun in place and used the thick cloud of dust to throw the wild demon off and into the beast's face. The demon roared in pain and rage, and Yagi ran under its belly to deliver a fatal blow. For 123/10000. The pile of corpses grew, but the flood did not lessen in intensity. They flowed in a steady stream, some grouped like swarms of bees, others solitary like nocturnal hunters. For a 369/10000. Texas Smash. His fists made contact with the stone armor of an armadillo-like beast. The demon roared and disintegrated under the force of his attack, taking with it a great wave of creatures caught in the unfortunate path of its attack. Suddenly, a deafening roar tore through the air. A winged demon, bigger than a 3-story building, descended from the sky, spewing bolts of dark energy from its elongated mouth. The hero dodged nimbly and leaped over the creature with both hands raised. He slammed his fists into its skull just as the golden arrows began to pierce the intruders in the air. Yagi managed to dodge the attack by using the dead body of the beast between him and the wall guard. He landed amidst a flurry of movement. Despite the fall of the winged demon, the horde seemed endless. Tentacled, multi-headed demons advanced relentlessly. The hero whirled and attacked. Each move was a deadly dance that left a trail of destruction in its wake. 6003/10000. This battle is fruitless, the hero thought to himself in a brief moment of hesitation. No matter how many demons I defeat, more will always appear. For every head I cut off, 2 more take their place. Behind the fallen bodies of the demons, numerous small creatures appeared, one of them flickered in and out of his vision. Another had poison darts for fingers, and some crawled along the ground like dark beetles. Yagi quickly dispatched them, although one of the creatures managed to graze his cheek with a spine. But this uneasiness, this predicament, this immense exhaustion. I chose it, didn't I? He wiped the blood from his cheek. A group of crystal-skinned demons moved forward. They reflected the afternoon light in blinding flashes, making it difficult for the hero to see. Yes, I did, he thought. When I took this quirk, when I decided to become a symbol and dedicate the rest of my life to others. As Yagi crushed their heads under his feet, their bodies instantly regenerated from the broken fragments. It wasn't until he reduced the fragments to fine dust that the creatures stopped moving, and the number on the scroll changed. 7974/10000. Then, the elemental beasts appeared, demons of fire, water, earth, and air. Each possessed devastating power. Yagi had to adapt quickly and use his surroundings to his advantage. He deflected a torrent of water from the water beast to extinguish the fire demons and used the wind from his attacks to disperse the air monsters. He smashed the earth creatures into harmless rocks with one precise blow and used the fragments to dispatch the stragglers around him. 9-139/10000. And the battle raged on. As the sun turned the afternoon red, the piles of demons around him grew like sand dunes, obscuring the sunset. He fought the whole time without moving from the fountain, and Midoriya's screams and contributions must have saved his skin more than once. By the time silence fell on the square, he was drenched in sweat, and his side throbbed with a pain that was both insistent and familiar. He took a few moments to catch his breath, cautiously surveying his surroundings and keeping one ear open to guard against any attack from the filthy creatures. "Did we make it?" the hero exhaled, gulping air like a fish out of water. Midoriya did not answer, and Yagi turned around, worried, only to find him looking at the numbers on the scroll in confusion. "All Might," the boy began. I think there's one more left." 9999/10000. "What?" "But..." Silence reigned around them. Not a single creature was left standing. Mentor and mentee looked at each other uneasily. They waited for several minutes with their guard up, but nothing changed. The air cooled the sweat on Yagi's shirt and refreshed his face, bruised from fighting. The stench of blood, decay, and filth lingered as a second thought beneath the relief of his well-deserved rest. After a few moments of silence, the hero dared to approach Midoriya. He held out his arms, and his student jumped from the fountain into his arms. Together, they walked through the piles of corpses. Yagi tugged at the boy's hand to quicken the pace and lead him away from the grotesque scene. He was suddenly aware of the bloody display of violence the boy had witnessed for several hours, and he felt ashamed. They climbed the steps to the copper door. The statue of the guardian was still there, holding the banner that reflected the same number as the scroll on the small statue above the fountain. 9999/10000. The hero stepped forward, ignoring the insistent tug on his sleeve. "All Might, be careful," Midoriya cautioned. "I know, my boy." All Might's brow furrowed, his gaze fixed sternly on the hunched statue by the door. "But I think I know who the final contender is. Step back, please." Once Midoriya was safely behind one of the pillars a few meters away, Yagi stood before the steel statue. Because of its towering stature, he could see right under its hood, straight into its silver orbs. "I'm ready," he declared. And then the statue moved. Without warning, the statue launched its first attack, its steel fist slicing through the air with alarming speed. Yagi pushed back hard, aiming to knock the statue back a few feet. But instead of retreating or retaliating, the statue leaped. With unexpected agility, it bounced off the wall, using it as a springboard to hurl itself back at the hero. Yagi ducked just in time, sidestepping the attack and countering with a direct blow to the statue's torso. The impact echoed like thunder across the silent landscape. But to his surprise, the statue absorbed the blow, barely staggering. With breakneck speed, it bounced again, this time using both the ground and the walls to move in an erratic pattern, making it difficult to predict its next move. The statue attacked with a combination of quick, precise blows, each more powerful than the last. Yagi found himself blocking and dodging, his muscles straining from the effort. One particularly powerful blow sent him flying down the stairs. UGK. He tumbled down a few steps, his ears ringing from the hard landing. The statue seized the opportunity, lunging at him and giving the hero no time to recover. With one smooth motion, it grabbed him around the waist and tossed him into the air. Before he could react, the statue bounced off the stairs and pillars, catching him mid-air with a powerful blow that sent him crashing into the ground. Yagi struggled to his feet and rolled out of the way of what would have been a devastating kick. Every time he tried to attack, the statue outpaced him in speed and agility, using the environment to its advantage. It bounced between walls and the floor, striking from unexpected angles and keeping him on the defensive. Soon, Yagi's strength began to fade. His previous fight with the beasts in the square, as well as the grueling battle with the angel at the Golden Gate, had taken their toll on him. This became apparent when he failed to dodge another attack from the statue, which landed both fists on his chest and sent him flying into a column by the stairs. Yagi was thrown backward, sliding down the column until he landed on the ground. Pain coursed through his body, his muscles exhausted from the relentless battle. A coughing fit threatened at the back of his throat, and he tasted the coppery tang of blood as he inhaled deeply, trying to maintain control of his muscular form. From a distance, Midoriya watched with wide eyes and trembling lips, murmuring his hero's name. Seeing the paleness of his cheeks and the redness of his eyes, Yagi strengthened his resolve and struggled to his feet once more. Despite his wounds and fatigue, he made another effort to rise. "Don't worry, young Midoriya," Yagi shouted, giving him a big smile to dispel his worries. "I will win this battle." His eyes glowed with determination. Midoriya lit up like a flower in the middle of spring, enthusiastically nodding as Yagi turned to face his opponent. He knew that his opponent was faster and more agile and that his diminishing strength was working against him. Thus, he had to find a way to even the odds. Yagi studied the statue intently, trying to discern a pattern in its movements. Without warning, the statue lunged again, brimming with confidence. This time, however, Yagi was prepared. He deflected the blow with his left arm and, in a swift motion, seized the statue's arm with his right hand. Channeling all his strength, he spun around and hurled the statue against the door with a thunderous roar. It started to rise, but it was slower than before. The hero had gained a brief advantage, and Yagi was determined not to let it slip away. With a roar of exertion, he lunged forward, his fist glowing with concentrated energy. The battle continued with renewed intensity as the statue prepared to counterattack. Yagi landed a few blows, and the statue landed more as their deadly dance unfolded. The statue lunged forward, its speed and agility still surprising the hero. He dodged a killing blow and used his strength to leap over the statue, grabbing its shoulders and using them as a springboard to rise even higher. From his position in the air, Yagi channeled all his strength into a single fist that began to glow brightly with an almost divine energy. With a shout of determination, he swooped down on the statue and slammed his fist into its steel chest with titanic force. The impact was devastating. The city seemed to tremble, and a shockwave rippled through the square and down the stairs. The steel statue buckled under the force, its parts finally succumbing to the hero's immense strength. With a final crack, it collapsed, its steel eyes flickering out one by one. Finally, the hero landed with a grace that contrasted sharply with the explosive display of power he had just unleashed. He was breathing heavily, his arms and legs burning from the exertion. As he watched the motionless statue and glanced at the number on the discarded banner by the door, he allowed himself a weary but satisfied smile. 10000/10000. Midoriya approached hesitantly, and Yagi pulled him into a tight embrace, overwhelmed with relief. The boy stammered, his face flushed with embarrassment, but Yagi paid him no mind. His gaze remained fixed on the fallen statue, which he regarded with a sense of respect. It had been a formidable adversary, fulfilling its role as the gatekeeper to the very end. Kneeling beside the statue, Yagi ran his hand over the cold steel surface. "You were a worthy opponent," he murmured, honoring the battle he had just fought. The statue, despite its defeat, stood as a testament to the strength and skill he had encountered. The corridor to the door was eerily silent, broken only by the sound of Yagi's heavy breathing and Midoriya's quiet muttering. Rising slowly, Yagi surveyed the surroundings, the walls and floor marred by the intensity of their fight. His eyes settled on the imposing bronze door ahead, the gateway to the Demon King's fortress. The door groaned on its hinges as it creaked open, revealing a dark corridor stretching beyond sight. Yagi shared a meaningful glance with Midoriya, silently wondering what challenges lay ahead. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to savor the hard-won victory before stepping forward into the unknown. "This is the final gate," Midoriya murmured, his eyes gleaming as they scanned the dark corridor. Around them, the sun had set, surrendering the day to the encroaching night. With one last glance at the fallen steel statue, they moved toward the gate. Each step bore the weight of their recent battle, yet there was an unusual lightness in the air, an echo of satisfaction from overcoming such a formidable challenge. Yagi felt a surge of almost unexpected pleasure. He would be proud. The thought made him stumble slightly. Midoriya shot him a worried look, but Yagi quickly waved off his concern. Sorry. I guess there's a lot of debris around here." They had just passed through the bronze doors when the statue's eyes began to glow, a warm, honeyed brown and gold in the fading light. The door closed behind them with finality, leaving them unaware of the statue at the fountain transforming into a golden child with a wide, beaming smile. I am a hero. The wide bronze doors slammed shut behind them, and the light faded. Midoriya jumped at the abrupt closure and ran towards the doors, feeling for the metal in the darkness. There's no way back. It's completely sealed. He stepped back, worried, and looked back at Yagi. In the darkness, only the light in his eyes was visible. Then the only way is forward. Together, they turned towards the corridor that stretched out to where the darkness became less dense. In the distance, they could see a faint red glow tinting the stone orange, a torch overhead. As they approached the light, Yagi's shoes bumped against something hard, and the hero stepped on some stairs. Feeling around with his foot, he discovered they were wide and low, ending in a vaulted passage lit only by the torch above. Why don't we take a break, All Might? So you can recover from the last battle. Yagi didn't need to see the expression on his ward's face to hear the boy's concern. He was tempted to refuse the offer, after all, they were getting closer to the end of their mission. But suddenly, he felt the weight of his exhaustion pressing down on him like a leaden cloak, and he thought he could afford to take a few moments to breathe. All right, son. They sat down on the first step. Their dark figures were barely outlined by the darkness of the passage. Yagi took a deep breath, slowed his pulse, calmed his breathing, and ordered his thoughts. Closing his eyes, he felt the power of One for All coursing through his limbs and felt it burning in his chest like an engine. Not yet, he told himself, glancing at the darkness of his surroundings. I can still go on. Next to him, the young Midoriya fiddled with his hands, obviously worried. Yagi's brow furrowed at the sight of his hunched silhouette. What is it, my boy? The boy took a deep breath. I'm sorry. What? Why are you sorry? Yagi held his ward's trembling shoulder as he bowed his head in submission. I'm sorry for getting you into this mess. My quirk is complicated. I haven't had a chance to experiment with it. I have theories, of course, but my only reference is the first time it manifested with my mom. Why haven't you used it before? The question was innocent. And yet, Yagi saw the shrug of his shoulders, and through the shadows of the tunnel, he could see the trembling knees of his ward. It has always been just me and my mother, he finally said after some hesitation. I don't think this is something that can be forced on anyone. First of all, because it's very intense. Yagi imagined the boy's pale cheeks flushing. And secondly, because I appear here with the person. To witness another's battle requires trust. Trust that you won't be harmed in the battle? What? No. Midoriya took his hand from where it rested on his shoulder and squeezed his fingers gently. I mean, you have to be sure I won't hurt you with whatever I find inside. What? I would never think that of you, my boy. Yagi leaned down to face the boy, his fingers unconsciously caressing his smaller palm. You are completely trustworthy. I know we haven't known each other long, but I can see that you have a big heart and truly care about the welfare of those around you. If I have to fight a long battle against my inner demons while watching the movie of my life, at least I'm glad to have you by my side. Yagi didn't know where his words had come from, but when he finally spoke them out loud, they felt right. He realized that despite the war that had been brewing since the beginning of his journey, Midoriya's quirk had not caused him any suffering. Even though the battles had been hard and he had felt tired and discouraged, he had suddenly become more aware of his existence. Perhaps his identity as a hero had caused him to become detached from his true self, and facing both demons and heroes on the ramparts had made him more sensitive to who he was. All Might. Midoriya's trembling voice snapped him out of his stupor, and he heard the boy's sobs before he felt her arms tighten around him. Thank you, All Might. I won't let you down. The boy sniffled, and Yagi grimaced at the sound as he patted him on the back. Don't worry, my boy. We'll get out of here, and we can find out more about your quirk in the future. Together. Midoriya nodded and wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Yagi tore off a piece of his shirt, ruined by the fights, to give it to him as a tearcloth. Thank you, All Might. He sobbed again. Toshinori Yagi. Midoriya froze. His huge deer eyes glistened under a fresh layer of tears. W.H. what? Toshinori Yagi. That's my name. He smiled at the boy and shook out his unruly mane with the hand he wasn't using to comfort him. But that would be inappropriate. You're the #1 hero, and I'm just my successor. Yagi interrupted. And you have the right to call me by my name. Besides, it would be more appropriate. To keep up appearances, you know. After a few moments of hesitation, Midoriya nodded. And they stood in silence, hardly broken by the halting inhalations of his ward, for a few minutes. Come, young Midoriya. We should get going. All right, Toshinori-san. They set off again. Yagi led the way, holding Midoriya's hand as they climbed the stone steps to the torch at the top. When they reached the landing, Yagi took the torch from the pedestal to light their way. After turning left a few times, the path began to descend, and it continued to do so for a long time, in one continuous descent, until the path was horizontal again. The air was warm and stuffy but not stale. Occasionally, they felt a draft against their flushed faces. After a few minutes, they found themselves in the middle of a landing. From there, they could see several doors, arches, and passages that were loose in the darkness at the sides of the corridor. Yagi turned around. He wanted to mark the way so they would not get lost when he became aware of a disturbing fact. The path is gone. Instead of the familiar ground that had led them to this landing, there was a stone wall covered with dirt and moss. Yagi saw his own nervousness in the worried expression on Midoriya's face. So he struggled to form a smile, barely lit by the fire of his torch. Don't worry, young man. Let's keep going. They took the central path that ran under the taller archway. Yagi led the way. They advanced cautiously, scanning every shadow and nook. After several minutes of silent walking, they finally came to a fork in the path. A warm, inviting light illuminated the passage to their right. To their left, the darkness was so intense it seemed to consume the torchlight. Let's go right, Yagi suggested, and Midoriya nodded quickly. They continued down the lighted corridor. Even though the light was warm and comforting, something inside Yagi, an instinct, stirred with unease. He had barely taken a few steps into the light when the floor gave way beneath his feet. Yagi jumped back, narrowly avoiding a pit of sharpened stakes. Toshinori-san. Stay back, boy. Yagi held out an arm and backed into the safety of the dark passageway where Midoriya was waiting. Breathing heavily, Yagi looked down and saw the stakes glowing menacingly. It's a labyrinth. And it's full of traps. He rubbed his face wearily. He hadn't thought for a moment that he would miss the fights with the demons. But he preferred the open battles, the violent encounters, to the uncertainty and meandering of the labyrinth. Let's go back. He let out a heavy breath, then retraced his steps back down the dark passage. Yagi looked down at the dark passage with regret. To his surprise, Midoriya took the first step into the darkness, reaching out to take the hero's stiff fingers between his smaller ones. Together, they stepped into the darkness of the passage. Shadows wrapped around their bodies and up his arm, dimming the torch's flames. Even though the fire did not go out, the light dimmed considerably, and they could only see a few steps ahead. For a brief moment, Yagi felt grateful that the light hadn't completely gone out. Without Midoriya's warm hand and the weak glow of the torch, he would have despaired soon. The loneliness and fear brought on by the labyrinth's darkness were so overwhelming and profound that Yagi felt an unbearable urge to rip his heart out of his chest just to escape the torment. Is this the price of self-awareness? The hero thought, tightening his grip on the torch until splinters pierced the skin of his fingers and his jaw clenched so tightly that his head began to hurt. Perhaps he had walked this dark path too long. Now, aware of the dead earth beneath his daisies and the crooked roots nourished by the spring rain, he felt incapable of moving forward without being overwhelmed by despair. Midoriya said nothing. He continued to drag him vehemently, sometimes pulling hard just to get Yagi to take another step forward. In the dim light of the torch, they could see hidden openings in the walls, numerous paths, holes and pits, and deep dark shafts that reflected the echo of their footsteps back to them. Yagi's arm brushed against the cold stone. The passage had become much narrower, forcing them to move in single file, with Midoriya in front and Yagi at the back. Suddenly, Midoriya let out a startled cry, jolting Yagi from the stupor he had fallen into upon entering the dark passage. He quickly raised the torch above their heads, and what he saw completely snapped him out of his introspective state. The walls were moving, slowly closing in around him. Run! They both hurried to run as the walls began to narrow, threatening to crush them. At one point, Yagi had to tiptoe with his back pressed against the wall. For a moment, he considered letting go of his muscular form. But the risk was too high. If he released it now, he might not be able to manifest it again later, leaving them defenseless against the Demon King. So he kept running, half crawling, half jumping until he finally threw himself through an opening that launched him into a vast space just before the walls collided with a deafening rumbling. The torch slipped from his hands. It clattered to the ground, and the light went out completely. "Young Midoriya," he shouted, crawling on all fours in the darkness. "Over here, Toshinori-san." He felt his ward's hand on his wrist and exhaled with relief when he felt the boy's curls resting on his shoulder. They stood like that for long a moment, reveling in each other's presence, victims of the hegemony of darkness. Suddenly, light pierced the darkness. One by one, 4 pairs of blue flaming torches flickered to life around the room. They found themselves in a large circular chamber with openings that revealed more passageways and moving staircases. In the center, a fountain of clear water bubbled softly, like an oasis amid the chaos of the maze. Slowly, the mentor and mentee rose to their feet. They approached the fountain cautiously, their eyes searching for any sign of danger. "It could be another trap," Midoriya said, analyzing the fountain with critical eyes illuminated by the torchlight. Under his watchful gaze, the image of the fountain began to ripple, and from the depths of the water, a silhouette emerged, a hooded figure with golden markings on its face and large eyes without pupils. A third eye on its forehead, surrounded by straight, glowing lines, remained closed. Midoriya took 2 steps back, and Yagi hurried to stand in front of his guard. But the mage did not move. Despite the man's apparent blindness, the intensity of his gaze was overwhelming. Yagi frowned. He took a step forward, ready to intervene, but the wizard surprised him when he spoke, his voice deep and enigmatic. "Dark shadows enshroud the future. If you continue on your path, hero, relentless doom will claim you in its eternal embrace." And with his warning, he disappeared. Only the bubbling of the fountain was evidence of the mysterious figure's presence. Midoriya and Yagi looked at each other uneasily. All around them, all but one of the torches suddenly went out, and the path that stretched under the only visible light was another corridor shrouded in darkness. "We have to keep going," Yagi said, suddenly aware of the clock that marked the end of his heroic form. Midoriya reached for his hand again, and together, they moved forward. "At this rate, you're going to die, too." The path before them was shrouded in darkness. Yagi and Midoriya moved slowly through the labyrinth, their heavy breathing echoing through the air. Thick, dark vines hung overhead, and a dense fog enveloped them from head to toe, making their already precarious visibility even more difficult. "This isn't right," the hero muttered, squinting as he tried to see through the darkness and fog. "Keep your eyes open, my boy." "Yes." Gradually, the fog began to thin, and a ray of light pierced through the thick shroud of darkness. Instead of the oppressive stone walls of the labyrinth, a lush green meadow stretched out before them, adorned with wildflowers bathed in the warm glow of the sun. In the distance, a crystal-clear river meandered around a hill blanketed in clover. Yagi, confused, was about to step toward the hill when a small hand tugged at his sleeve. "Wait, Toshinori-san," his ward said. "This can't be real. The mage's prophecy, it said the road ahead would be dark and lead to our doom. I think he was referring to the Demon King's fortress." Midoriya's worried eyes, bright green against the dullness of the landscape, met Yagi's. Suddenly, the surroundings seemed pale compared to the light on his student's face. "Yeah, you're right, son." The wind stirred, sending flower petals swirling around them. The sun bathed Yagi's face as if reluctant to part, and a part of him yearned to cling to the meadow's beauty. But his ward's hand anchored him, and with a monumental effort, he stepped away from the dreamlike landscape. As soon as their feet left the field of flowers, the illusion shattered and they found themselves surrounded by stone walls and darkness again. Yagi remained silent, gently stroking his pupil's wild curls and taking comfort in the sound of his boy's surprised laughter. They walked on, feeling their way with their hands, choosing a passage that led to more stairs lost in shadows. They entered a room that branched off into more corridors, and as they considered their way back, they noticed that the stairs had disappeared. Now 3 doors emerged from the darkness. The path has changed again. They randomly chose another door. Yagi began to doubt that there was a right way. The labyrinth seemed to be designed to mislead them and to thwart their confrontation with the Demon King. For what purpose, Yagi had no idea. But for the sake of their sanity, they pressed on through dark rooms filled with traps, deep pits carved into the rock, narrow corridors that undulated beneath their feet, and steep staircases that led to enigmatic chambers. Finally, they came to another room. The floor was covered with mysterious symbols, and in the center stood a pedestal upon which rested a glowing chest. Another trap? Yagi eyed the chest suspiciously. His pupil moved closer and Yagi followed. Even though they had to be prepared for anything, they needed to stay prepared and keep moving forward, taking action rather than just reacting to the challenges ahead. With a resounding thud, they opened the chest. Surprisingly, nothing happened. They exchanged confused glances, and then Midoriya cautiously reached down. Oh! He produced a small golden key, and as they examined it, another door materialized at the back of the room. Their attention shifted to the lock on the side of the door. Midoriya handed the key to Yagi and prepared himself with raised hands to face whatever challenge lay behind it. But instead of a corridor, there was a mirror. What? An image materialized on the mirror's surface. It was Yagi in his heroic form, wearing his blue, white, and red uniform. He was tall and strong, and his bright blue eyes were framed by a stern scowl. What kind of trick is this? Yagi approached, his reflection following his movements. He touched the cold surface of the mirror and felt shivers run down his spine when those sapphire eyes scanned his decadent form. Should I give up? The hero asked. Give up and let my legend live on for the sake of the peace I desire? Yagi took a step back, stunned. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The fear and anxiety that had been at the forefront of his mind returned with a vengeance. No. He murmured slowly. I can't give up. The world still needs me. The world still needs me. That's right, his reflection repeated. The symbol of peace must continue his duty. I must protect the people. Therefore, I must strive to stand firm, to bring peace to the world. His piercing gaze swept over the tattered clothes, the scratches on his face, and finally, the wound on his side, hidden beneath layers of cloth. But what is peace but a pause between conflicts? Will my sacrifice be enough to achieve a fleeting illusion of peace? It is not an illusion, Yagi replied through gritted teeth, feeling an inexplicable surge of emotion, like an exposed nerve. All might makes people feel safe. I am a symbol, an example. A deterrent. You're wrong, he spat angrily. If a society cannot sustain itself without my support, have I really done a good job? Anger surged through his chest, consuming the deep-seated fear that was festering in his heart. Toshinori-san, don't listen to him, it's another illusion. But Yagi didn't hear the nervous voice of his ward. He had eyes and ears only for the hero in the mirror. In a society that relies on professional heroes for social work and support, my role as a symbol of peace is vital to the fate of the world. They depend on me, on my solitary figure. If my sacrifice ultimately proves futile, it will be my greater shame for failing to promote collective responsibility and growth. And it will be my fault for always choosing to remain alone, to carry the weight myself instead of teaching others to share the burden. Enough! Lightning crackled through the air, and a blue flash illuminated the darkened room. Yagi's fist slammed into the mirror, shattering it into 1,000 pieces in a shower of crystals and magical energy that completely enveloped them. Midoriya screamed his name, and the force of the explosion tore them apart, sending them in opposite directions. Yagi felt himself being pulled through a vortex of light and darkness. Behind his closed eyelids, he could still see the sapphire eyes of the being from the mirror, assessing and judging him. He felt the wind on his face as he was hurled through various rooms, vast, expansive halls, narrow, low corridors, dark, fog-shrouded landscapes, and desolate, fire-scarred, or frozen wastelands. For what seemed like hours, though it was probably only moments, Yagi flew through the ever-changing labyrinth until he finally landed in a dark, silent room. He struggled to his feet, shook the dirt from his clothes, and took a quick look around. The room was a cave, almost empty except for himself and the hooded mage standing across from him. Behind the mage, there was a plain brown wooden door. "What do you want from me?" Yagi exhaled wearily. His anger was gone, only exhaustion remained. If the mage had manipulated the labyrinth, he was the only one who knew the way out. Were there more traps behind that door? Another endless, dark corridor? Yagi needed answers, needed to find Midoriya, and needed a moment to catch his breath. You can't go any further. Beyond these corridors, only death awaits you. I do not fear death. The hero replied. I just want to help people. The wizard took a step forward, his cloak billowing as if stirred by an invisible breeze. There is a difference between fearing death and disregarding one's own life, All Might. You think that self-sacrifice is more valuable than those you leave behind. Yagi felt a knot in his stomach. I do what I have to do to protect my city. If that means sacrificing myself, then that is a price I am willing to pay. The mage shook his head, his gaze intense. That's merely an excuse, a way for you to escape your pain. You believe you can redeem yourself by dying a hero, but you fail to see that your life holds value beyond your death. Those who love you, those you've left behind, do you really think they will find solace in your sacrifice? Yagi opened his mouth to answer, but a wave of pain stole his breath. He clutched at his chest as if trying to contain the fire burning within him and could only breathe out a shaky sigh, his eyes suddenly filled with tears. Ah! A trembling sigh escaped his lips. This is familiar. At this rate, you're going to die, too. And suddenly he had a glimpse of the mage's face, barely in the shadow of his hood. The mage had sunken cheeks, pale lips, and bloodshot eyes. Although he was tall, his slumped posture made him look small. Guilt hit Yagi like a tidal wave. I've been the number one hero for a long time, he said after a few moments of heavy silence. And yet, I haven't been the best person. He approached the mage, who held his hands up defensively. Yagi watched as the landscape shifted through the openings in the walls. Despite the changing scenery, the door remained unchanged, and the mage stood resolutely in front of it. I have not been a good friend. It is difficult to grasp the meaning of realizing that one is loved. When Yagi chose to inherit Nana's quirk and embrace the path of heroism, becoming a symbol and pillar of society, he understood the life he was committing to, as well as the life he was giving up. He sacrificed his future for the future of the world, he sacrificed the chance to have a family, to travel with friends, to live a normal life. So what if he's not happy? There are countless things in the world, more important things, people that deserve attention and concern. So what if he is heartbroken? There's no one to blame but himself. His smile isn't for him but for the people. People everywhere have to think that I am never afraid. As the symbol of peace, he must give everything, his smile, his strength, his life, to carry on Nana's legacy and combat the world's evils. She instilled in him a love for life, and Torino taught him the best way to live it. And yet, how could Yagi expect his love for others to flourish if he wasn't open to receiving appreciation from those around him? Even though All Might is a hero, he doesn't exist in a vacuum. No matter how high his pedestal or how much recognition he receives from those around him, love must be reciprocal and freely given. Yagi is not alone in his suffering from dissociation. Those he loves also love him in return, and to give love without accepting it back is an act of selfishness. He cannot deny his loved ones the chance to express their affection for him. Young Midoriya, your quirk is amazing. He stopped before the magician and put a hand on his shoulder. In that moment, it felt as if he was no longer so great, they were equals. He looked into the mage's eyes, met his pale gaze and the closed eye on his forehead, and felt a surge of compassion. "Thank you for asking me not to go." The third eye on the wizard's forehead began to glow. Perhaps these were not the right words, or perhaps he was not the right receptor for them. Nevertheless, he stood before the gatekeeper with renewed determination and declared, "I will not die for my cause," he said. "I will live for it." The mage's eyes glowed, and suddenly, Yagi's vision was flooded with vibrant colors. The wooden door creaked open, revealing a brilliant white portal. The golden orbs of the mage looked at him with an unreadable expression. "I will let you go," the mage finally said, stepping aside to clear the way for the hero. "But remember your promise, hero. Grief is the oldest material of memory, and it is not enough to wish or intend to keep your word. Remember this in the future, and live not as a martyr but as a true leader." And with that, he disappeared, and Yagi went out through the last door. Tashinori-san. As soon as he landed in a carpeted hallway, his eyes were drawn to the familiar green of his ward. He welcomed him into his arms, responding to his pupil's nervous concern with a reassuring smile. "Tashinori-san. Are you all right? I was so worried. I was falling, and there were more rooms, and the labyrinth kept changing, and you weren't there." "Calm down, son. I'm fine." He ruffled Midoriya's unruly curls and laughed at his embarrassed squeal. "And it seems we can end our journey now." "What?" The boy looked around, noticing the new aesthetics of the corridor. Instead of rough stone walls, there were ornate tapestries. A thick carpet covered the floor, and several torches lit the way to a single, wide-open gate. In the distance, they could just make out a familiar courtyard. "That's. We're in the Demon King's fortress," the hero intuited. "We escaped the labyrinth." Midoriya exclaimed excitedly, clenching his hands into fists as he looked around in joy. "Did you have to fight anyone else?" "No," Yagi answered after a few seconds of thought. "I think the labyrinth was not meant to harm us but to keep us from going any further." Midoriya put his hand to his chin, muttering to himself, "That makes sense. He could have separated us from the beginning or put us in a room with no way out to kill us." "I met the mage," Yagi blurted out, causing Midoriya to jump, startled. What? And nothing bad happened?" "He talked to me." Midoriya's eyes widened in surprise. That's new. I thought we were the only conscious ones in this landscape." Yagi thought of his previous opponents, the demon servants, the guards at the wall, the angel, the gate warrior. "I think, not everyone communicates with words, young Midoriya." Midoriya froze. His wide eyes looked up at the hero, and slowly, carefully, he reached out a hand to interlock his fingers with Yagi's. Yagi squeezed Midoriya's hand tightly. And they kept it that way. Together, they considered the last part of their journey. Beyond the gate, another battle awaited them, perhaps the hardest of all. Still, Yagi's heart was at peace. He felt the warmth of his pupil's hand radiate through his body. They shared a moment of silent understanding, and at Midoriya's short, silent nod, they moved forward towards the battle. At a safe distance, a hooded figure watched the exchange between student and teacher. When the hero gently took Midoriya's hand, the figure retreated a step into the shadows. And when the hero smiled a small smile that seemed to light up his entire face, the mage did the same. Somehow, the future seemed brighter. Yagi and Midoriya stepped into a courtyard surrounded by towering walls. The air was light and refreshing on their sweaty bodies. Above them, a night sky stretched out, filled with stars as far as the eye could see. Towers rose like sharp fangs against the bright sky, and in the center of the square, the Demon King awaited them, smiling. Now free from the adrenaline and terror of their first battlefield experience, they could see him in his entirety. The Demon King was a colossal figure wrapped in dark armor that seemed to absorb all the starlight. His eyes, red as rubies, glowed with a hellish fire. His very presence radiated an indomitable power that made the earth tremble beneath his feet. Even though his face was hidden by his armor, Yagi could almost visualize the Demon King's sardonic expression, his pale curls, firm jaw, and deadly smile. He understood why his initial reaction had been to associate the villain with All for One. Those eyes, that imposing dark frame. Perhaps later, when they were out of immediate danger, Yagi would reflect on what the anomalous figures represented in his mental landscape and how they related to the essential aspects of his life experience. But for now, his thoughts were consumed by the resolution of his immediate conflict. Foolish hero. So arrogant is your ambition, the villain spoke, his voice a deep, guttural rumble that seemed to shake the stones across the courtyard. I shall extinguish that flame. Yagi took a deep breath and exhaled through his teeth. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw his ward moving cautiously toward the periphery. The Demon King extended his arms with malicious anticipation, and Yagi charged forward, his fists crackling with the energy of One for All. His fists collided with a deafening thud. The towers and the entire fortress trembled as Yagi was hurled several meters into the air. He managed to regain his balance just in time to avoid crashing into one of the ramparts, but the sharp sting in his wounded side nearly brought him to his knees. He's too strong, Yagi gasped, noting the demon's impassive stance. The Demon King advanced slowly, each step resonating with a power that seemed to shake the very foundations of the castle. Is this all you have, hero? Is this all the strength of the strongest? Yagi exchanged a desperate look with Midoriya, who watched from behind a thick pile of rubble. They both understood that the final challenge would be against an overwhelming force. The energy of All Might was fading, and the power of One for All flickered in his chest like a candle in a violent storm. Though his voice was silent, his words were clear in his ward's expression, "Don't give up, All Might." Yagi stood up and roared at the Demon King once more. He launched a kick that the demon skillfully evaded. Before Yagi's fist could smash into the space between the demon's eyes, it was halted as if it were an insignificant mosquito. Pathetic, the Demon King said, flicking Yagi aside with a casual swipe of his wrist. Yagi crashed to the ground, his body aching and his spirit nearly broken. He felt his strength drain away, his limbs grew weaker, his bones heavier, and the pain became more intense, more raw. He tried to get up again, but a kick from the monster knocked him to the ground. The Demon King towered over him, his shadow completely engulfing him. Behind them, the stars shone brightly. The Pleiades were omnipresent in the sky, their light more brilliant than the demon's crimson eyes. Face it, hero, the villain sneered. You will lose to me. You are helpless. And you are alone. Yagi closed his eyes, and a spark ignited within him, a last vestige of strength. That is not true, he replied, pulling himself up with difficulty and wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth with his sleeve. He dared not look away from the Demon King. Instead, he stood with his fists raised in defiance, gathering all his strength into a single arm. His bones cracked under the force of his quirk, and light crackled around him, illuminating the square with a wave of blue light. You're stronger than me, he conceded, growling under the force of his attack. Bigger and more experienced, but you're wrong about one thing. Don't worry, All Might. After all, I'm not alone. I'm here with you. A rock flew through the air like a bullet and slammed into the side of the Demon King's mask with great force. The villain staggered, momentarily stunned, and turned his gaze to Yagi's pupil, who was panting and watching from the pile of rubble. Seizing the opportunity created by the Demon King's distraction, Yagi launched a counterattack. With a final cry of sheer determination, Yagi lunged forward and drove his fist through the Demon King's black armor. His huge crimson eyes widened in surprise as Yagi's knuckles broke through his defenses and plunged into the pool of shadows beneath his mask. The villain roared, his voice turning into a guttural growl as the shadows escaped the confines of his armor. The demon raised his hands as if trying to catch the shadows escaping from the confines of his armor, slipping away like smoke from a campfire. But his effort was in vain. Yagi and Midoriya watched as the monster vanished into the shadows, the remaining pieces of its armor clattering to the ground with a cacophony of metal and ash. And then, there was silence. Yagi fell to his knees, exhausted and drained but somehow feeling lighter. He looked down at his hands in disbelief. His once powerful, muscular arms now appeared gaunt and frail. He touched his face, confirming that his once imposing physique had diminished. When? Tashinori-san. Midoriya rushed over and supported the hero, helping him stay upright. Are you all right? his ward cried. Yagi took a deep breath. He felt it filling his lungs, the cool night air soothing the pain in his bruised body, and he basked in the warmth of his ward, his support and concern. Young Midoriya, he began, but the brilliance of the stars caught his attention. They both gazed in awe as the night sky glowed with their radiance. The battle was finally over. I'm fine, he finally whispered. And with the next blink, the world changed, and he found himself staring at the peaceful sight of the beach. Yagi's first breath had a taste of salt. It was late afternoon, and the sea was dark. The sky was painted with a faint red glow, and the cold of the night seeped through his gym clothes, biting into his skin. His knees were damp, and his legs were numb. Yagi surveyed his surroundings with renewed eyes. The calmness of the beach stood in stark contrast to the warfare that had dulled his senses moments before. Overhead, seagulls squawked, their black silhouettes etched against the fading dusk on the horizon. His eyes scanned the surrounding area until they finally locked onto Midoriya. The boy was slumped in the sand right next to him, his face pale and sweat clinging to the curls on his forehead. Young Midoriya! Yagi rushed to his pupil, dropping to his knees as his hands hovered over the boy's form, uncertain and filled with worry. Was he injured? Midoriya had mentioned that time passed differently on the battlefield. Had they been attacked? But there were no visible wounds, and Yagi himself felt no discomfort. In fact, he felt strangely invigorated. Young Midoriya, are you okay? What's wrong? He gripped the boy's shoulder, gently helping Midoriya to sit up. The boy straightened, exhaling tiredly as Yagi's expression remained tense and unyielding. I'm fine, Midoriya finally murmured, resting his head against Yagi's bony shoulder. I think it's my quirk. Yagi's mouth formed a small, thoughtful O. Of course. Though the battle had lasted only a few minutes, the entire scene had been brought to life by Midoriya's quirk. He marveled at its immense power and potential, the ability to dive into the mind of another and craft such a detailed and intricate illusion. For a brief moment, Yagi pondered how far the limits of such an incredible quirk could extend. But he quickly dismissed the thought, refocusing on supporting the trembling boy, still unaccustomed to the toll of wielding his quirk so extensively. Of course, he said. You must be exhausted. I'll help you get home. The boy nodded, pleased, and then went still. He stole glances from the corner of his eye, ducking his head to hide the blush that was starting to bloom across his pale cheeks. Tashinori-san. What is it, my boy? Would you like to stay for dinner? My mother will prepare katsudon. Yagi felt an odd itch at the tip of his nose. Gently, he wiped the moisture from his eyes, only to feel his ward's small hand resting on his palm. That would be nice. Yes. Yagi gave him a small smile, a genuine smile. Thank you. The dinner had gone surprisingly well. All Might no, Tashinori-san, as the man had insisted, had been cautious at first. It was strange to see someone as tall and imposing as his idol acting so timidly. Together, they loaded their things into Tashinori's sleek black sports car. Izuku could barely contain his excitement when he spotted the All Might plushie hanging from the rearview mirror. On the way home, he texted his mother to share the news about his new addition, and her enthusiasm matched his own. Despite his exhaustion, Izuku's nerves buzzed with an electric energy, keeping him wide awake. He fidgeted in his seat, his fingers trembling as he pointed out the way to his mentor, who drove at a surprisingly leisurely pace for someone famed for his speed. The soft strains of an English song drifted through the car, sparking Izuku's curiosity about Tashinori's taste in music. His mind raced with questions. What did Tashinori like to eat before a fight? How did American culture compare to Japanese? What were his favorite things, ice cream flavors, animals, and beyond? Izuku's excitement grew, fueling an intense desire to learn everything about his mentor. Had Tashinori recognized the figures from the battle? Was he feeling awkward about Izuku's presence? Every thought, every question, only heightened his anticipation and wonder. Finally, oblivious to Izuku's inner turmoil, Tashinori parked near the apartment building. When Izuku's eyes landed on the familiar structure marked with a 2, his racing heart began to settle. He sighed in relief as his mother rushed to greet them with a broad smile, which faltered slightly when she saw Toshinori supporting him. Izuku! His mother hurried over, enveloping him in a warm embrace. Together, they guided him to the couch. Exhausted, Izuku sank into the cushions with a deep, weary sigh. His mother's concerned eyes followed Toshinori as he carried Izuku's backpacks inside, leaving his shoes neatly at the entrance. What happened? I'm fine, Mom. I'm just tired. Is it because of your training? Are you pushing yourself too hard? No, he began slowly. It's because of my quirk. His mother's eyes widened in surprise, darting between Izuku's cautious expression and the solemn figure of the man standing at the edge of the room. I see, she said. She adjusted the pillows under Izuku's head and tenderly stroked his disheveled curls with soft, loving fingers. Why don't you rest while I finish dinner? Then we can talk. She glanced back at Toshinori, her firm expression leaving no room for argument. All three of us. Izuku nodded, still feeling weak and unsteady. Moments later, Toshinori sat on the couch next to him after his mother had firmly declined his offer to help in the kitchen. I'm almost done. Don't worry, she had said with a raised eyebrow, prompting Toshinori to jump to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment. He bowed deeply and introduced himself. Toshinori Yagi, I am Izuku's mentor. Toshinori-san, his mother replied with a nod. I'm Midoriya Inko. I'm glad to finally meet you. She smiled warmly and shook Toshinori's outstretched hand with a gentle but firm grip. Soon after, she disappeared into the kitchen, leaving them alone on the couch. A soothing silence settled around them. As Izuku sank into the plush pillows, he drifted off while Toshinori silently checked his phone. Battling against the sleep pulling at him, Izuku softly called out. Toshinori-san. Ha? What will happen now? The man fell silent. Izuku propped himself on his elbows, trying to read his stern expression. Now. I'll do something I should have done from the beginning. Toshinori brushed a hand over his lips, straightening his posture to meet Izuku's gaze. I'm going to talk to your mother, and I'll ask her permission to make you the next user of One for All. Izuku's mouth fell open in shock, and every trace of sleep vanished from his mind in an instant. To say that his mother was unhappy would be an understatement. She hadn't reacted abruptly. After dinner, an energizing katsudon that warmed Izuku and gave him a bit more stamina for the upcoming conversation, they sat in the dining room with cups of hot tea, while Toshinori faced the challenging task of explaining his gift. 8 users, and you want to pass this quirk on to Izuku? Toshinori nodded, and Izuku's mother anxiously twisted the ends of her hair. This is a lot to take in. I understand, Toshinori replied. I know it's overwhelming. But recent events have made me realize my mistake. I don't want to train your son behind your back, Midoriya-san. I want your permission to train Izuku, support him in his studies at the AU, and help him become a hero. His mother was silent for several minutes. Though Toshinori's expression remained serious, Izuku could see that his hands were shaking under the table and that he was nervously clutching his knees. The sight of Toshinori, usually so composed, showing signs of nervousness made Izuku realize how much he wanted his mother's approval. A warm sensation spread through him, and he had to fight back the smile that was threatening to appear on his face. Her gaze eventually settled on Izuku, her expression softening slightly. It sounds like a very heavy burden for one person. It is. His response was brief and measured. Does anyone else know about this? Only a few close allies, and now you too. Don't worry, Toshinori-san. Your secret is safe with us. Toshinori offered a faint smile and nodded. Izuku's mother took another long moment to process the information. She sipped her now cold tea, her eyes shifting between Toshinori and Izuku as if seeking answers in their expressions. Finally, she spoke. You can train Izuku. The man exhaled softly, and Izuku watched as his shoulders relaxed with relief. Realizing he had been holding his breath in anticipation, Izuku let out a sigh of his own. However, his mother's stern expression made Izuku's stomach twist uncomfortably. First, I want to establish a few rules. Toshinori nodded firmly, and Inko continued. First and foremost, Izuku's safety must be the highest priority. Of course. Toshinori exclaimed, a slight blush creeping onto his cheeks as Izuku and his mother looked at him in surprise. I mean, yes. I'll ensure his safety. I would never willingly put him in danger. I'll train him to defend himself and others. You have my word. Inko nodded, satisfied. Secondly, he cannot neglect his academic performance for the sake of training. Although he plans to apply to the UA, I'm sure that won't be a problem. Izuku's heart soared with joy. His mother believed he could get into the UA. Suddenly, the prospect felt more tangible, more real. And finally, Izuku's quirk must remain confidential. Toshinori's eyes widened in shock. What? Izuku, aware of his mother's reservations about his quirk, instinctively shrank back in his seat. I understand. Izuku explained that initially, we weren't sure how his quirk worked. Actually, we didn't even update the records after it manifested. Officially, Izuku has no quirk. But... Wait, please. Let me finish. Toshinori nodded, uncertainty etched on his face. I know it's illegal to lie on a quirk form. I understand that. But when we first registered it, Izuku hadn't manifested his quirk yet. He was quite late in developing it. We even consulted a quirk doctor, and he even confirmed Izuku's diagnosis. Why not modify it later? Toshinori asked quietly. Inko fidgeted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. Izuku wanted to speak up but couldn't find the words. As he listened to the conversation, he felt a growing sense of detachment, like he was disconnected from the situation and merely watching it unfold from a distance. He felt strangely disassociated, as if he was no longer fully present in the discussion happening around him. I'm guessing you've experienced the effects of Izuku's quirk firsthand, Inko continued. That's correct. It was a rather profound experience, Toshinori admitted. It certainly was, Inko agreed. She took a deep breath, her soft hand gently squeezing Izuku's white-knuckled fingers for comfort. I don't think Izuku has explained my quirk to you yet. I can attract objects towards me. For almost 30 years, my limit was items the size of my hand and weighing less than a kilogram. Inko reached across the table, and as she flexed her fingers, a spoon floated into her palm. However, after experiencing Izuku's quirk up close and fighting my own battle, my quirk has grown exponentially. I can now lift objects as heavy as my body weight, even if they're larger than me. Toshinori's eyes widened in surprise. Izuku lowered his head, feeling a wave of embarrassment. Do you realize how this might look from the outside? Izuku's quirk can enhance other people's abilities. I know it's wrong to keep it hidden, and it will eventually come to light when he starts training at UA. But I want to protect him from those who might try to exploit him, at least until he's better prepared and surrounded by people who truly care about his safety and well-being. I understand, Toshinori replied thoughtfully. You're right. Certainly, there will be people who would want to take advantage of young Midoriya's quirk. I promise to keep him safe and to support and protect him when the time comes for his quirk to be revealed. Inko smiled, her eyes filling with tears of relief and joy as Toshinori bowed respectfully. Izuku's eyes burned with unshed tears, and he felt his mother's comforting hand on his trembling fingers. Young Midoriya, Toshinori said, drawing Izuku's gaze up. As his blurry vision cleared, he saw the reassuring smile of his hero. Don't worry. I'll do my best to be the mentor you deserve and help you become a hero, no, the best hero. Toshinori's expression suddenly hardened with resolve, and Izuku watched in awe as his newfound determination shone through. But I can't do it alone. The man stood up, his imposing figure dominating the small apartment like a tower amidst a field of flowers. My position has clouded my humility. I didn't become number one on my own. I had support mentors and peers who helped me get here. Izuku watched as Toshinori gathered his belongings, speaking with determination. I will make sure, young Midoriya, that I prepare you to the best of my ability. I'll set everything to ensure you can inherit this quirk and achieve your full potential. Give me a few days to organize my plans and sort out the details. In the meantime, focus on resting and recovering so we can dive into training with renewed energy. At the apartment door, Toshinori gently ruffled Izuku's unruly curls, his fingers lingering on his shoulders. With his heart pounding like a drum, Izuku gave in to the impulse and wrapped his arms around Toshinori's slender frame. "Thank you, All Might," Izuku sobbed into his shirt. I won't let you down." Toshinori smiled warmly and rubbed soothing circles on his back. "I know, son." The days that followed were surprisingly monotonous. Izuku was so accustomed to his usual routine of school, homework, training, and dinner that the sudden halt in his activities left him feeling oddly disoriented. With no school to attend, his mother had called in sick for him, and after the intense conversation with Toshinori, his mother decided he needed a few days to recover from the exhaustion caused by the heavy use of his quirk. So, his days were filled with sleeping, updating his hero analysis notebooks, and nervously biting his nails in anticipation of what was to come. Toshinori stayed in touch regularly. That morning, he had sent Izuku a picture of an Endeavor mug that changes color with hot water. The black mug turned white, revealing flames in Endeavor's scowling face. Izuku was thrilled, not just because of the cool mug but also because it showed Toshinori's genuine effort to connect with him. Although they had been polite and curious during their training sessions, they hadn't been particularly close. Breaking through the barrier of formality was a challenge. After all, All Might was the #1 hero, and Izuku was just an enthusiastic kid with a flood of questions that he had to hold back to avoid overwhelming his mentor. But something had changed after that afternoon on the beach. Toshinori had become more open to Izuku's curiosity and even encouraged it. The man's genuine interest in Izuku's life seemed almost surreal. Izuku found himself eagerly sharing entries from his older notebooks, and Toshinori took the time to proofread certain sections, offering encouragement and praising Izuku's attention to detail. They began sharing personal information, favorite fictional characters, their preferences for hot or cold coffee, favorite parts of the United States, and opinions on hero rankings. Toshinori answered with ease and reciprocated with his own questions. Communication between them had seamlessly woven into their daily lives, and Izuku couldn't have been happier. As Izuku was playfully scrolling through his cell phone, it suddenly vibrated, startling him. The jolt caused him to lose his grip, and the phone dropped, landing painfully on his forehead. Ack! Rubbing his forehead to soothe the sting, Izuku looked at the new message from his mentor. Toshinori Yagi. Good morning, young Midoriya. I trust you had a restful night and are feeling fully recovered. Tomorrow, I would like to take you on a small outing to show you something important. I will arrive to pick you up at 9 o'clock. Additionally, I found the article you shared, Exclusion and Power Dynamics, a socio-political analysis of mutant minorities and humans without quirks in 23rd century Japan, to be highly engaging. I would like to discuss it with you in more detail during our excursion. Izuku smiled as he read the message, still adjusting to the hero's formal yet warm tone. He quickly typed a reply to confirm his availability. However, the word excursion sparked his curiosity. What could Toshinori possibly want to show him? His anticipation grew, and with a frustrated gesture, he rubbed his eyes and sighed as he watched the clock on his bedside table tick slowly. All he could do now was wait. The luxurious skyscraper mirrored the expansive blue sky in its glass facade. At the top, a big planet with double rings gleamed in the morning light, and Izuku's eyes were drawn to the building's striking opulence. All Might, or Toshinori Yagi, the building's owner, watched with a smile as Izuku took in the grandeur. With a playful pat on the back that almost caused Izuku to stumble, Toshinori urged him forward through the bustling crowd on the sidewalk. Come on, son. He is waiting for us upstairs. Izuku's eyes widened. What? Who's waiting for us? Toshinori only grinned as they entered the grand lobby of Might Tower. The hero walked briskly, leaving Izuku only fleeting moments to admire the marble floors, the expansive lobby, and the elegant decor surrounding them. I'm sorry. I promise I'll give you a proper tour later. For now, let's head upstairs. I have something special prepared for you. They reached the elevator, and Toshinori pressed a button to access one of the upper floors. Izuku's nervous reflection appeared in the elevator doors. His mouth felt dry, and his fingers nervously toyed with the drawstrings of his backpack. Noticing his unease, Toshinori placed a comforting arm around his shoulders and gave him a reassuring squeeze. "Don't worry. Everything will be fine." The elevator doors opened to a short hallway, leading them to a door marked Meeting Room Number 9. Toshinori entered a code on the panel beside the door, which slid open to reveal a spacious room. Inside, a long glass table was surrounded by neatly arranged leather chairs. At the far end of the room, a large screen was mounted on the wall, and the curtains were drawn to block the panoramic view of Roppongi City. A man sat in the chair to the right of the empty head of the table, his sharp gaze fixed on Izuku. His dark green hair, neatly combed, was interrupted by a striking yellow streak that matched his stern, watchful eyes, partially concealed behind thin gold-rimmed glasses. Those piercing, analytical eyes seemed to study every detail of Izuku with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Izuku's mind stalled, struggling to process the figure scrutinizing him so closely. The man's commanding presence seemed to dissect every facet of Izuku's being. As the weight of the moment settled in, a rush of embarrassment flooded Izuku's veins, and he could feel his ears burning. Instinctively, he bowed deeply as the man rose with a poised elegance that heightened his intimidating aura. Izuku opened his mouth, ready to introduce himself, but before he could speak, the man's voice cut through the air like a crack of lightning, calm yet foreboding, hinting at an oncoming storm. "So this is the boy." Toshinori's large hand squeezed Izuku's shoulder reassuringly, and Izuku bit the inside of his cheek, desperately holding back the torrent of questions swirling in his mind. Standing before him was Sir Night-Eye, All Might's legendary companion. There were countless things he wanted to ask. What was the true nature of his quirk? Was it based on a complex analysis of environmental patterns and the target's behavior to predict future events accurately? Or did it involve accessing a superposition of quantum states and manipulating subatomic particles in the brain to visualize the most probable outcomes? Could he possess a unique brain structure, like a third eye in the temporal lobe, that detected temporal vibrations to glimpse immediate future events? Perhaps he even accessed a parallel dimension where time flows differently. He had so many theories and questions. Izuku knew Sir Night-Eye was a hero shrouded in mystery, known mainly due to his association with the number one hero. The nature of his quirk required a low profile, and Izuku swallowed his curiosity, forcing himself to stand tall, though his nerves churned uneasily in his stomach. Oblivious to Izuku's inner turmoil, Sir Night-Eye's piercing gaze swept over his face, taking in every detail of his expression. After a tense moment, he finally spoke. "He is small." Izuku choked on his saliva, hurriedly covering his mouth as he struggled to catch his breath. Toshinori's large hand rubbed his back gently, offering support. "Yes, he is," Toshinori said kindly, his voice reassuring amidst Izuku's desperate coughing. "But he'll grow. Let's get the introductions done properly." When Izuku finally regained his composure, Toshinori gestured toward the man in the formal suit who adjusted his glasses and crossed his arms. "This is Sasaki Mirai, also known as Sir Night-Eye. We were partners for 5 years until certain circumstances led us down different paths." Toshinori's face tightened with a hint of discomfort, and the reflection on Sir Night-Eye's glasses made his expression unreadable. After a brief, tense silence, Toshinori cleared his throat and gave Izuku's shoulder an encouraging pat. "Mirai, this is Midoriya Izuku, my successor." When Izuku finally regained his composure, Toshinori gestured to the man in the formal suit who adjusted his glasses and crossed his arms. The man's impassive expression remained unchanged, but Izuku noticed a slight frown at his mentor's last word. "I see." Toshinori cleared his throat and led Izuku to an empty chair in the back of the room. Night-Eye resumed his seat while Toshinori instinctively took the head of the table, positioning Izuku on his left and Night-Eye on his right. "I have brought you here today to discuss your training, young Midoriya," Toshinori began. "Recent events have made me realize that my approach has been less than ideal. With careful planning and Mirai's expertise, I believe we can create a training program that is better suited to your needs." Izuku nodded, taking in the weight of Toshinori's words. Night-Eye leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of his face, his eyes fixed on Izuku. "Toshinori has told me about you," Night-Eye began, his voice calm and penetrating. "But let me make one thing clear from the beginning. I do not approve of you." Izuku's heart sank, and he clenched the fabric of his pants, trying to steady the trembling that coursed through him under Night Eye's intense stare. The man raised 3 fingers, his expression unyielding as he began listing his reasons, each word striking Izuku like a crushing weight. Izuku listened in silence, his breath caught in his throat. First, because you are only a middle school student. You lack the emotional maturity and real-world experience required to handle such immense power. While your intentions may be laudable, your judgment is likely to be clouded by youthful impulses that could lead to reckless and potentially dangerous decisions. Night Eye lowered 1 finger, his stern gaze never wavering. Second, due to your apparent lack of quirk. Tashinori has informed me that you are not precisely quirkless, yet he has not provided further details about your quirk. For all I know, it could be volatile and dangerous or completely ineffective in combat. The sudden acquisition of such great power by someone so young poses a significant risk, particularly to someone still developing their ethical framework and moral judgment. His hand clenched into a fist, and his eyes gleamed behind his glasses. And third, because it will be dangerous for you. Izuku flinched, his gaze fixed on the firm line of the hero's lips, feeling the weight of each word pressing down on him. Giving you one for all will make you a target for villains and organizations seeking to manipulate or eliminate you. It will endanger not only your life but also the lives of your friends and loved ones. Are you prepared for that? Furthermore, the weight of this responsibility will be immense, and the pressure to live up to a legendary hero like All Might could severely impact your psychological well-being, potentially leading to anxiety, depression, or an identity crisis. Even if your body can withstand the physical demands, can your mind endure the burden of being the successor to the number 1 hero? Izuku swallowed hard, his heart pounding fiercely. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the stern expression on his mentor's face and realized with a jolt that Tashinori might share some of Night Eye's concerns. Although Tashinori's presence in the room indicated his commitment to training Izuku, Night Eye's points were strikingly valid. Could Izuku truly shoulder the weight of such a legacy? As a vulnerable child with a seemingly weak quirk, unable to even protect himself? And yet, would you accept my embrace, All Might? I'm not alone. Mummy. Can I be a hero? Yes, Izuku. You can be a hero. Young Midoriya. You can be a hero. And yet, Izuku firmly believed that the desire to help others wasn't a privilege or a birthright. It wasn't defined by one's quirks or abilities. It was a struggle, an instinct. Even if he didn't gain Night Eye's approval and All Might decided not to give him his quirk, Izuku wouldn't abandon his dream. He cares about All Might, of course, they've been partners for years. His judgment must be incredibly valuable to him. Maybe Izuku was weak, small, and helpless. Perhaps he lived in a constant struggle and would never fill the immense void left by his childhood hero. But, even if he never received All Might's quirk, it would still be worth it to have pursued his dream of becoming a hero, if only for a moment, to see his mentor's carefree smile. I have to be strong, for myself and my dream. I understand your concerns, Izuku began slowly, his voice a soft murmur in the silence of the boardroom. And I know you're right. I'm not the ideal candidate to inherit All Might's quirk. I'm young, inexperienced, and weak. Tashinori's fingers twitched on the table, but an icy glare from the stern hero kept him from moving. For as long as I can remember, I have admired heroes not just for their power or strength, but for their bravery, sacrifice, and dedication to protecting those who cannot defend themselves. Your presence and your smile have lifted the hopes of so many people. Izuku swallowed and looked down, feeling tears prick in his eyes. I know I'm not ready for this power. I know I'm weak, small, and insignificant, but... He noticed a small scratch on the corner of the table as he continued, even if you don't approve of me and All Might decides to pass his quirk to someone else, I won't give up. I understand that I don't need a quirk to save someone. I will not abandon my dream. With or without your support, I will train hard and strive to be useful. Being a hero is more than having extraordinary strength or abilities, it's about having the heart and determination to do what's right, even when it seems impossible. I know that One for All is greater than me, but my desire to protect others is even stronger. That's why, with or without your help, I will keep pushing forward. Not because it's easy, but because I know it's the right thing to do. Finally, he looked up, his glowing eyes locking onto the surprised gaze of the hero. "But if you give me a chance, I promise not to disappoint you. I know it will be risky and the path won't be easy, but with your guidance and support, I'm confident I can become someone worthy of this power. I won't rest until I show you that choosing me was the right decision." Suddenly, he stood up and bowed deeply to the two heroes, hearing his mentor's startled gasp amid the pounding of blood in his ears. "Please, train me." The room fell into a heavy silence, almost palpable. The atmosphere seemed to hum with tension, and Izuku's hands trembled at his sides as he continued to bow before them. He closed his eyes, unable to look at his reflection in the glass surface of the table, which made him feel lightheaded. My desire to protect others is greater than one for all? How arrogant, how foolish. I see. Nightai's voice cut through his thoughts. Izuku raised his head just in time to see the hero turn away. Adjusting his tie, Nightai spoke without looking back. Tashinori will provide you with an itinerary. I expect punctuality and discipline. With that, he left the room. The sound of the door closing echoed through the boardroom. For a few moments, this sound mixed with the unrestrained throbbing Izuku felt at the bottom of his throat. Tashinori, next to him, watched the closed door with wide eyes, and slowly, a smile began to find its way onto his face. I don't think he likes me, Izuku finally said. Tashinori chuckled and stood to support the trembling teenager. Actually, I think you did better than I expected. He tousled Izuku's curls with a smile, enjoying the surprise on his face at his mentor's cheerful demeanor. Cheer up. I know Mirai can be a bit stern right now, but I trust him with my life. I'm confident that, over time, he'll come to warm up to you and see the hero you can become. Izuku nodded hesitantly. Now. Do you still want me to take you on the tour I promised? Come on, I have to show you today's cafeteria special. And with that, Tashinori pulled Izuku out of the meeting room. As Izuku toured the gyms, shook hands, and tasted the burgers with his mentor's face on them in the building's impressive cafeteria, he suddenly realized that his life was about to become much more chaotic. XX, Mar, 22XX. Muzutafu, Japan. Hero analysis for the future. Number 0. Name, Midoriya Izuku. Age of manifestation, 5 years old. Quirk, embrace. Description: everyone fights a battle within themselves. With my quirk, I can manifest this internal battle to expose a person's weaknesses and sorrows. Through this fight, these weaknesses can be confronted, leading to improvements in both the individual's quirk and mental state. Hero name? Work in progress, perhaps All Might has suggestions. Notes: each battle is unique. Not only do they differ in length, but also in the scenarios and the villains that manifest in them. Injuries sustained during the fight do not seem to affect the individual, but using the quirk causes me excessive exhaustion. Perhaps with constant use I will be able to use it more regularly? P.S. Not all hugs trigger a fight. Thankfully. I'll have to add more information later. I look forward to learning more about my quirk with my new mentors. I wonder what kind of battles the villains are facing. The coolness of the mat was a blessed relief against Izuku's flushed skin. He wiped the sweat from his face, his hands trembling and breath ragged. That was disappointing, Sasaki stated, his towering figure casting a shadow over Izuku. Through damp curls, he saw his long legs and the piercing look on his mentor's face. We've practiced this. Your defense is sloppy, your stance is off, and you're still not balancing your weight. Do you need a break to go over the basics again? And no, let's keep going, Izuku muttered, breathless, pushing himself up onto his hands and knees. As he rose on unsteady legs, trying to catch his breath, Izuku noticed Tashinori lingering near the doorway, watching their training. Just then, Tashinori's phone buzzed, and he glanced down before giving them an apologetic nod and stepping out to answer the call. Sasaki's gaze lingered on Tashinori's retreating figure, his expression unreadable, while Izuku's eyes darted between his mentor's departure and the hardline of Sasaki's mouth. Let's take a break, Sasaki declared, striding toward the far side of the gym where his belongings lay. Izuku followed silently. Weeks of training with Sasaki had tuned him to expect the man's strict, often critical approach. Taking a long sip from his water bottle, Izuku suddenly observed Sasaki's athletic frame out of the corner of his eye. Even in a dark sweatshirt and sweatpants, Sasaki's sharp, toned figure was undeniable. Izuku had learned not to be fooled by that lean physique and intense gaze. Sasaki possessed the skill and precision of a close combat specialist. Though his quirk wasn't meant for fighting, his expertise in battle techniques made it irrelevant. Sasaki stood in the center of the mat, noting the question in Izuku's eyes as they darted from his face to Toshinori, who lingered silently on the sidelines. You didn't think you'd inherit the most powerful hero's quirk without solid combat training, did you? Sasaki's words cut through the room, his gaze steady. Izuku opened his mouth to respond, but his voice caught. His hands moved in a quick, anxious gesture, pinned under the weight of Sasaki's intensity. No. Of course not. I just didn't expect this. Sasaki raised an eyebrow, his eyes skimming over Izuku's shaky stance. You'll be ready to face him, he tilted his head toward Toshinori, once you can hold your ground against me. From that moment on, training transformed into a demanding routine focused on endurance and precision. Izuku met Toshinori every other morning at the beach, and their sessions fell into a predictable rhythm, each one driving him to improve. They began by clearing litter from the sand, stacking it in orderly piles. With just one pointed look from Sasaki, Toshinori had arranged for a truck to handle the heaviest debris, a quiet response to his colleague's unspoken judgment. Sasaki, however, had been the one to hand Izuku a set of reinforced gloves, boots, and durable tools, wordlessly equipping him for the task. These clothes are an open invitation to tetanus, the man muttered over the crashing waves. Which reminds me, ask your mother to bring me your medical records and digital vaccination certificate. Izuku chuckled at the memory, recalling the man's peculiar way of expressing concern for others. Setting his water bottle aside, he carefully pulled out his new analysis notebook from his backpack. This brief interlude provided the perfect opportunity to wrap up the entries he had left unfinished the night before. He flipped open to a fresh page, excitement bubbling within him. Until Lady's quirk is truly impressive, he mused, erasing her sketch's initial outline. How do her bones support such a massive form? Maybe they become hyperdense and flexible, allowing them to withstand immense pressure without collapsing under their own weight. The muscle fibers could multiply in strength and endurance, but that would require an extraordinary energy expenditure. Perhaps her body activates accelerated cell regeneration to create enhanced muscle tissue. I wonder if her frequent size changes make her constantly hungry. His train of thought was abruptly interrupted by a voice nearby. What's that? Izuku jumped, startled, and his notebook slipped from his sweaty hands, sailing to land at his mentor's feet. Sasaki bent down, smoothing the creased pages with a thoughtful frown. Hero analysis number 14, he asked, glancing at the cover. Ah, yes, Izuku stammered, his heart racing. It's just a hobby. I really like quirks. Sasaki raised an eyebrow, silently asking for permission to look further. Izuku's pulse quickened under his gaze. Nervously, he nodded, feeling a mix of pride and apprehension. The room filled with the rustle of pages as Sasaki examined each note and sketch, his expression shifting with curiosity. After a tense moment, Sasaki handed him the notebook back, his tone unreadable. Do you have more like this? Yes, Izuku replied slowly. It's a hobby I've had since I was a kid. Sasaki adjusted his glasses, studying Izuku for a long moment before finally saying, it's good. Izuku opened his mouth, struggling to find the words as he met the hero's sincere gaze. A rush of warmth flooded his face, and he thanked Sasaki with a shaky, trembling voice. Come, Sasaki said, gesturing for him to return to the training mats. Let's continue. A green blanket suddenly fell over Izuku's face, startling him. Oh, sorry, baby. I didn't see you there. I was about to fold the laundry. His mother appeared from behind the couch where he had been lying down. Izuku straightened up and handed her the blanket, offering a small smile. Do you need help? Thanks, son. I'd appreciate the company. Inko settled beside him, placing a basket of freshly folded clothes on the coffee table. As they organized the items, her eyes drifted to Izuku's relaxed face before noting the subtle changes in his arms and legs with a smile. "What happened to my baby? He's turning into quite the little man." "Mom," Izuku blushed, hurriedly folding the trousers in his hands to distract himself. "I'm just saying what I see," she continued. "I thought you were training at the beach today." Izuku opened his mouth to respond but then looked down at the soft fabric in his hands, absent-mindedly stroking the material as he replied. "No. Tashinori-san said he'd be busy this morning, and Sasaki-san doesn't approve of me training without supervision." As Izuku reflected on this, a warm feeling washed over him. He thought back to their recent training sessions, recalling the engaging conversations they had shared. Though Sasaki could be gruff and demanding, his strictness stemmed from a genuine concern for their safety. Even amidst their busy lives, Tashinori juggling his hero duties, Sasaki managing his agency, and Izuku focusing on his studies, Sasaki had managed to craft a training routine that worked for all three of them. This balance allowed Izuku to continue his training while fostering a sense of camaraderie among them. They always began their sessions with thorough stretching and warm-ups, used only top-notch equipment, and reviewed his training schedule and diets meticulously every week. What brought Izuku the most joy was observing the evolving dynamic between Tashinori and Sasaki. Initially, their relationship had been strained and awkward, overshadowed by the silence that had hung between them. However, over time, Izuku had noticed a gradual shift. The tentative exchanges that once felt forced now blossomed into a comfortable camaraderie. Watching them share insights about their routines or discuss the latest developments in the Hero Society filled Izuku with relief and satisfaction. He had no desire to analyze the complexities of their past disputes, that was their personal history. Instead, he relished in the simple yet profound spectacle of his mentors reconnecting, as if the fragments of their past were finally beginning to fit together once more. However, the last few days had felt oddly unsettling. Tashinori had grown increasingly distant, often slipping away to take phone calls or abruptly canceling their morning training sessions, leaving behind lengthy, overly formal apologies that lingered like an unresolved mystery. Meanwhile, Sasaki remained quiet, lost in thought, frequently watching Tashinori with an expression that Izuku found impossible to interpret. A nagging sense of unease stirred in him, as if Tashinori were hiding something. Yet whenever this thought crossed his mind, it felt presumptuous, and he quickly redirected his focus to his exercises or homework. "Sasaki-san is a very responsible person," his mother said, pulling him from his reverie. "I'm relieved to know that you can count on him to oversee your training." "Yes, it is indeed an honor to have his support." They fell into a contemplative silence as they continued to fold clothes on the table. After placing the blankets inside the linen cabinet at the end of the hall, Izuku's phone vibrated in his pocket. Pulling it out, he read a message from Sasaki. "Sasaki-san. Good morning, are you available?" Izuku quickly replied, affirming his availability, and soon received a response. "Sasaki-san. Good. I'll pick you up in 20 minutes. You don't need to bring your training clothes." He typed a brief acknowledgement and rushed to prepare for Sasaki's arrival. A strange sense of foreboding settled into his bones, like a dark cloud of doom looming overhead, casting a shadow that obscured his thoughts. Izuku slid into the cold leather seat, feeling the chill seep in. He buckled his seatbelt and placed his backpack at his feet, focusing on the man's impassive expression. "Good morning, Sasaki-san," he said. "Good morning, Izuku." The engine hummed steadily, and the turn signals flashed, yet Sasaki made no move to merge into traffic. They remained still outside his apartment complex. Izuku glanced at the lights, noting how Sasaki's large hands rested on the gearshift and steering wheel, the evening's glow reflecting off his golden glasses. "What are we waiting for?" Sasaki's golden eyes turned to him, shimmering like liquid gold in the sunlight. Izuku caught his own reflection in his glasses. "I have something for you," Sasaki replied, leaning into the back seat to retrieve a carefully wrapped box. He handed it to Izuku, who felt its rectangular shape and weight. It was about the size of a notebook, wrapped in paper that echoed the colors and patterns of All Might's uniform. Izuku obeyed, his nervousness giving way to curiosity. Carefully, he removed the wrapping paper, gently peeling off the ribbon to keep it intact. Beneath the paper lay a white box adorned with a small silver logo. Lifting the lid revealed a shiny black screen that reflected his wide, astonished eyes. A tablet? He picked up the device, staring in disbelief at the slim, sleek, silver tablet, with a small pen nestled in the top. Beneath it lay a compact charger and headphones, neatly arranged on a bed of confetti in vibrant shades of red, yellow, and blue that matched the colorful wrapping. "Your hero analyses are excellent," Sasaki remarked, studying Izuku's reaction. His eyes sparkled intently as he continued, "They contain practical and useful information. But remember, information can be dangerous." Izuku listened carefully as Sasaki elaborated. "From now on, you'll be in close contact with important heroes and authorities, and what you learn from them could be used to exploit or endanger both the heroes and their missions. Still, I recognize your talent and want to encourage your ability for analysis and meticulous observation. Your notebooks are a testament to your passion for heroism, showcasing your analytical mind and capacity to identify patterns and solve hypothetical problems. For this reason, I give you this." He tilted his head towards the tablet in his hands and continued. "It is configured specifically for you. It includes biometric access through facial recognition and fingerprint, advanced data encryption, a built-in VPN for online privacy, a self-destruct feature after multiple failed login attempts, and automatic security updates. These layers of protection ensure that only you can access the information on your device. Your training program is preloaded so you can edit your schedule as soon as you enter UA." Izuku opened his mouth, then closed it in disbelief. He felt strangely lost in the conversation. Though his habit of analyzing heroes was well known among his friends and family, he had never imagined that it could evolve into a skill he could utilize in his heroic practice. Much less that a professional hero like Sir Night-Eye would be the one to nurture his oldest hobby. "Once you enter the UA," he had mentioned. This statement echoed in Izuku's mind. Did he really believe he could get into the school of his dreams? Sir Night-Eye's faith in him ignited a spark of hope within him. It wasn't just him, it was also his mother and Tashinori who believed in him. Perhaps it was time for him to trust himself a little more. "Thank you so much," he murmured finally, clutching the tablet to his chest. His astonishment melted into a genuine smile, lighting up his face with gratitude and confusion. Sasaki studied his expression, and for a moment, the corners of his lips curved into a small smile. "You're welcome," he replied, starting the car. "Where are we going?" The warmth in Sasaki's face vanished at the question, replaced by a stern demeanor. "There's an important matter we need to discuss with you. But we can't do it in your apartment. We'll meet her at an intermediate location." "Her?" Izuku wondered inwardly, but seeing his mentor's rigid stance, he decided to keep his concerns to himself and nodded in understanding. "I wonder what this is all about. And if it has something to do with All Might." The rest of the ride passed in silence. "So, you must be Midoriya-kun." The small woman extended her gloved hand, and Izuku, almost in a trance, shook it. She wore a crisp white coat with a familiar blue visor resting above her squinting eyes. She turned to greet Sasaki warmly, her enthusiasm evident. Standing just behind her, Tashinori met Izuku's dazed gaze with a steady yet reassuring smile that helped ease his nerves. "Take a seat, young man." Recovery Girl gestured to a chair in front of her wide glass desk. Tashinori sat by the door, just out of his line of sight, while Sasaki took the seat beside him. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Midoriya-kun. Tashinori-kun has spoken very highly of you." Izuku's nerves eased a little as he caught a faint blush on Tashinori's ears. "Tashinori-san talks about me," he thought, feeling a small swell of pride. Recovery Girl's tone shifted as she continued, her expression turning serious. "Well, I called you here because there's an important matter we need to discuss." Izuku swallowed, glancing anxiously at Tashinori. "Is this about?" His voice drifted off as he directed a meaningful look toward Tashinori. Recovery Girl followed his gaze, her expression softening briefly before she nodded. Anxiety twisted in his stomach, his hands growing clammy under the woman's steady, focused stare. "That's right. But it's also about you." The heroine stood and opened a drawer behind her, causing a small retinal scanner to flicker to life. Once authenticated, she retrieved a simple blue folder, thick with papers. What is this? Izuku managed. Take a look. She handed him the folder, and Izuku took it with trembling fingers. He opened the folder. The first page was a medical file, not just any file. His heart lurched as he read the name written in stark black ink at the top of the paper. This is... Izuku's voice barely escaped him. All Might's medical record. Yes, and every scan and test since his injury. Izuku's pulse raced. Why are you showing me this? He whispered, the weight of the moment crashing over him. The file felt unbearably heavy in his hands, as if it bore the weight of All Might's life, the story of his injuries and struggles. Under the gaze of his two mentors and the heroine, Izuku felt unworthy of the information within. It was strangely incriminating. I won't bore you with the details, but context is important for what I will show you next. The heroine guided the folder, still gripped in his trembling fingers, to her desk and spread the photographs and documents across the glass. Sasaki leaned forward beside him, his presence looming over Izuku's shoulder. These are the CT scans from 5 years ago, she said, holding up one of the images. And these? She revealed a pair of recent scans. These were taken a few days ago. One image was particularly striking. It depicted what Izuku thought was Toshinori's chest. The first scan looked dark and mottled, with small structures resembling misaligned twigs in some areas appearing amorphous and bleeding. This first scan was taken a few days after the battle that caused the injuries you're already familiar with. It shows extensive inflammation, hemorrhage, pleural fluid, and areas of necrosis. Recovery Girl gestured to the second scan in Izuku's trembling hands. This one, she explained, was taken just a week ago. Izuku's stomach tightened as he examined it. The mottled, dark areas of the lung he'd seen in the previous scan had faded, revealing a new, healthier structure. A once chaotic network of veins and tissues appeared aligned and organized, stretching outward like petals unfurling. The dense clots and bleeding patches had vanished, and the damaged lung, though not yet complete, was slowly beginning to resemble the healthy organ beside it. Alveolar regeneration is underway in these lighter areas, she continued, adjusting her visor while her gaze remained firmly on Izuku. Scar tissue has been replaced by new growth, and the bronchi show a healthy alignment. Early on, there was a total collapse of the left lower lobe and extensive trauma throughout. Her voice softened, but there was a steady certainty behind her words. What we're witnessing now is a lung in the process of healing itself, a result we never thought possible. Izuku's awe deepened, fully absorbing the weight of what lay before him. Impossible, Sasaki murmured, voicing Izuku's disbelief. Recovery Girl took the images from his cold fingers, sifting through additional papers in her folder before meeting his gaze with quiet resolve. The Doppler ultrasound shows almost complete blood flow restoration, she noted, adjusting the folder on her lap. The contrast agent spread evenly, confirming full vascularization in the new lung tissue. There are no clots, no signs of hypoperfusion. Izuku blinked, staring at the impossible images. He barely registered Sasaki's hand on his shoulder, but the touch grounded him, breaking through his tension. There was an unspoken solidarity in it, a reminder that he wasn't alone in his wonder and, in that quiet moment, perhaps they both shared a fragile hope. But Recovery Girl wasn't finished. She unfurled additional images and plates, her expression unwavering. This isn't isolated to the lungs. The stomach and duodenum show similar patterns. The gastric mucosa, once ulcerated, is now regenerating at an accelerated rate. The muscle layers are restoring, and the nerve and capillary networks are reconnecting. Each word layered a new awe within him, and Izuku took a steadying breath, knowing that this discovery was beyond anything he'd imagined. Toshinori shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the topic being discussed in his presence. However, Izuku noticed the steady calm in his expression and his hands clasped tightly on his knees. If we hadn't seen it for ourselves, Sasaki trailed off, unable to put into words what the clinical data plainly showed. Toshinori's recovery was unfolding in ways that defied conventional medicine, all due to a quirk as mysterious as it was astonishing. It took Izuku longer than he would have liked to grasp the conversation's implications. The realization hit him like a tidal wave, making the room spin as he counted the tiles on the ceiling, fighting a wave of dizziness. So, you're saying, my quirk did this? It's not what I think, young Midoriya. It's what the evidence shows. A loaded silence followed her words. Sasaki's calm voice broke through, directed at Recovery Girl. Who else knows about this? Only the three of us and Principal Nizu. This information is highly classified, as you can understand. That's impossible, Izuku finally murmured, the eyes of everyone in the room fixed on his pale face. My quirk, it can't do that. It's not a healing quirk, it's more like an illusion. A mind trick? This doesn't make any sense. How could a quirk like his heal someone as powerful as All Might? Izuku tried to ponder the notion but found it impossible. The heroine stood and moved around her desk, fixing him with a steady gaze. Izuku swallowed hard, feeling small and exposed under the intensity of her scrutiny. Let me ask you something, Midoriya-kun, she began carefully. When I use my quirk, is it truly my quirk that heals? Or does the body heal itself? Izuku opened his mouth to respond, but the words escaped him. He looked at her, struck by the calm neutrality in her expression, listening as she continued. The healing process depends on the body's natural ability to recover. Medicine and quirks, for that matter, she gently tapped his knee with her cane, startling him. They can't make the body do what it isn't capable of doing on its own. The human body has natural repair mechanisms, the immune system, blood clotting, and cell regeneration. Drugs and quirks facilitate these processes, they relieve symptoms, eliminate pathogens, or restore balance. But they don't cure on their own. Instead, they create conditions that allow the body to perform its own healing. The heroine rubbed her chin thoughtfully, studying him with a long, searching gaze. Nevertheless, I'm quite impressed with your quirk's ability to drive these processes, the heroine said. To tell you the truth, I've never encountered a quirk like yours. While I don't believe it can restore Toshinori-kun to his former glory, as the scars from his past injuries seem to be beyond even your quirk's reach, I truly believe your quirk will enhance his quality of life. Izuku's chest tightened at her words, and his inner turmoil must have shown, for Sasaki placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. Don't worry, he said, his intense gaze shifting between Toshinori and the heroine. This information is undoubtedly impressive. He paused, choosing his words carefully. We must proceed with caution and precision. Midoriya-kun is under our care, and we'll ensure to guide and protect him as we uncover more about this new development. The heroine nodded, rearranging the folder in her hands until the incriminating evidence was locked away once more. The adults exchanged further words, but Izuku couldn't make sense of their conversation. Lost in a daze, he found himself staring at an orange candy resting in the palm of his hand as Sasaki led him out of Recovery Girl's office. Izuku's head spun as he pressed the back of his hand to his forehead, feeling an unexpected warmth. His brain was overloaded with the deluge of information he had just received. Thoughts raced through his mind, a chaotic clash between the urge to articulate them and the static threatening to engulf him. Sasaki guided him to one of the benches along the corridor, and he sank onto it without protest. Rubbing his eyes with his fingers, he focused on the stars dancing behind his closed eyelids. Now that the heroes understood more about his quirk, would they consider sidelining his training in favor of exploiting his gift? Would All Might reconsider his desire to make Izuku his successor? Maybe their perspective was misguided. If his quirk could genuinely help others heal, was it selfish to want to become a hero when he could potentially save lives, just like Recovery Girl? Yet healing and empowerment came at a cost. Everyone fought their own inner battles. What if, during the use of his quirk, they lose that battle? Under what circumstances could he wield his quirk to save someone? He had already used his quirk on Toshinori several weeks ago, it wasn't a quick fix. He would need to step away from the chaos of battle, act as a support hero to protect himself and offer aid once the immediate danger had passed. Was it wise to pursue joining the UA under these conditions? Can I be a hero? Was I wrong to try to be more than what I am? A hand touched the back of his neck, pulling Izuku out of his thoughts. He looked up to see Sasaki, a frown creasing his forehead, holding a small plastic cup between his fingers. Here. Sasaki offered something to him, and out of pure inertia, Izuku reached out to take it. It was an ice cube. The sudden chill jolted him back to reality, and he stared in confusion at the small, guilty object that began to drip cold water into his palm and between his fingers. Ease your mind, Sasaki said. Ha? Sasaki adjusted his glasses in a familiar, practiced motion. He placed the small cup on the seat beside Izuku and crouched down in front of him, meeting his gaze directly. You are not alone in this. Don't let the circumstances overwhelm you. We will continue with your normal training, and nothing has to change now that we know more about your quirk. Izuku felt a tightness in his chest at the reminder of his situation. But another cube joined the pool of cold water in his palm. Relax, he muttered. You're still overthinking. I have a lot of doubts, Izuku confessed. We'll figure it out, Toshinori, recovery girl, you, and me. Izuku closed his eyes and took a deep breath, letting the coolness of the ice cube in his palm freeze his tumultuous thoughts, halting them for a moment and granting him a brief clarity. What now? Sasaki smiled at him, holding out a handkerchief to dry the pool of water in his palm. We'll focus on fighting one battle at a time. The ride home was silent. Izuku leaned against the window in the back seat. Sasaki was driving, and Toshinori sat in the passenger seat, having joined them to discuss their discoveries with Inko. Although he hadn't been very vocal, he had wrapped his arms around Izuku as soon as they met in the lobby, offering a silent relief. Was it comfort for himself, for Izuku? He didn't know. But the way he tightened his embrace around him had filled Izuku with warmth and solace. Even though they hadn't trained that day, Izuku felt tired, exhausted, and numb. Still, Sasaki's words echoed in his mind, forming a barrier against the intruding thoughts. One battle at a time, he reminded himself. I think I can do that. He allowed himself to be lulled by the car's gentle rocking, the classical music softly playing on the radio, and the reassuring presence of his two mentors in front of him. His dreams were peaceful. When Toshinori awoke him in the car park outside his apartment, he remembered only vague traces of a vast starry sky, a flight of stairs that stretched out of sight, and a large, closed door. XX, April, 22XX. Muzutafu, Japan. Hero analysis for the future. Number 0. Name, Midoriya Izuku. Quirk, embrace. Description, everyone fights a battle within themselves. With my quirk, I can manifest this internal battle to expose a person's weaknesses and sorrows. Through a fight, these can be overcome, and the individual's quirk, mental and physical state are enhanced by it. Hero name? Notes, overcoming the internal battles not only boosts the mental state and the quirk but also the physical state of the individual. How does this all relate? If winning the battle has advantages of this kind, what would happen if it were lost? There is more to this than I first imagined. I need to investigate further. But maybe I'll postpone my research for a while. Spring is coming.